Good afternoon. Welcome to the September 12th, 2024 meeting of the Federal Secure Cloud Advisory Committee, or FSCAC. My name is Michelle White, and I am the Designated Federal Officer, or DFO, for this advisory committee. I'd like to thank all of our presenters, attendees, and stakeholders for joining us today, including those who provided public comment. Public comments submitted via the FSCAC public comment form by Wednesday, September the 4th, have been provided to committee members. Before we start, there are a few things that you should know. This meeting is being recorded via Zoom. This is an advisory committee that is statutorily required under the James N. Imhoff National Defense Authorization Act for fiscal year 2023, and thus formally established under the Federal Advisory Committee Act, or FACA, as of our charter's official filing date of February 28th, 2023. This committee is considered a federal advisory committee and is governed by the requirements under FACA. My role as the DFO is to manage the day-to-day administrative operations of the committee, attend all committee meetings, and ensure that the committee operates in compliance with FACA. The duties of this committee include providing advice and recommendations to the GSA administrator, the FedRAMP board, and agencies on the technical, financial, programmatic, and operational matters regarding the secure adoption of cloud computing products and services. The majority of the work of this committee will be focused around the FedRAMP Authorization Act of 2022's statutory requirements. And the purpose is specifically to, 1, examine the operations of FedRAMP and determine ways that authorization processes can continuously be improved. 2, collect information and feedback on agency compliance with and implementation of FedRAMP requirements. And finally, 3, to serve as a forum that facilitates communication and collaboration among the FedRAMP stakeholder community. I will now go through a roll call for all committee members. Please let me know if you are present by stating here. Larry Hale.
Here.
Thanks, Larry. Michael Villacerca. Carlton Harris.
Here.
Thank you, Carlton. Kayla Underkoffler.
Here.
Josh Kruger. Daniel Payne.
Here.
Marcy Womack.
Here.
Bronco Boken.
Here.
Matt Scholl.
Hi, Michelle. I'm here.
Hi, thanks, Matt. Bo Burles.
Present.
Lamont Yarbrough. Nauman Ansari.
Here.
Jackie Snelfer. Bill Hunt.
Here.
Joshua Cohen.
Here.
All right, thank you all. It does look like we do have a quorum established. So I'll go ahead and now review our purposes, outcomes, and agenda topics for today, just for everyone's awareness. The purpose of today's meeting is twofold. We will get an update from OMB on the recently released memo, and we'll receive stakeholder input on our top 2 priorities for the year. The outcomes for today are a shared understanding of the OMB's impact of the impact of OMB's FedRAMP memo, and a shared understanding of the challenges both facing industry and agencies during the FedRAMP authorization process. Our agenda today is as follows. We'll do a welcome call to order, which we have done now. And then we'll jump straight into our public comment period until 12:25. And then we'll take some quick chair remarks until 12:30. Next, we'll hear from OMB and their FedRAMP memo until 12:45. And then we'll have a Q&A session until 1:15. And then we'll take a 15-minute break until 1:30. And we'll just go ahead and move right into our panel discussions for today, each timed approximately an hour, starting with the industry panel discussion, which will include both small cloud service providers and industry representatives, and ending with a panel discussion with the agency liaisons. We will end the day with key takeaways and closing remarks no later than 4 p.m. A few housekeeping items for our committee members and speakers today. Please be sure to identify yourself before speaking so that those listening online or reading the minutes after the meeting will know who made which comment. And this is a virtual meeting, so please make sure that your microphone is on mute anytime you're not speaking. When it is time for the committee to ask questions and you'd like to raise your hand, please click on the reactions button in the menu bar and then click raise your hand. And if you remember to click lower your hand when you are done speaking, I would appreciate it. Lastly, if you are not a committee member, please hold all of your comments until the public comment period. And again, ensure that your microphone is on mute otherwise. All right, great. We will go ahead and move into our public comment period. At this time, I would like to welcome the members of the public to share their comments. To our speakers, please note that a timer will be displayed on the screen indicating your time remaining, and an alert will indicate that you are out of time. Each speaker will be allotted 3 minutes to make their comments. We will be interrupting speakers who do exceed 3 minutes to speak, so please speak succinctly and be respectful of the time. As a reminder, all of the public comments submitted by Wednesday, September 4th were presented to the committee members prior to this meeting. And with that, I would like to get started. And I'll begin to call on people who have submitted comments online and in case they are in attendance today. And if we have remaining times, we will move to other people. Do we have Ryan Gutwin in the meeting who would like to speak? All right, great. Chris Dietrich. We have somebody who listed themselves as with the initials KM. All right. We do have somebody who provided comments with the name of Anne Marie Clean. All right. Jennifer Pierce. We also have somebody named Rineth Kota who submitted comments. Tim White. And finally, Scott Beauregard. Okay. If anyone else would like to make a comment, a public comment today, please go ahead and raise your hand and I can call on you in the order that you raised your hand. All right, I am not seeing anyone
Oh.
with raised hands. I do,
I cannot, I'd like to make a comment, but I can't seem to raise my hand on the screen here.
I've got my hand up as well. How about we have who was speaking just now go ahead first, and I'll go after you.
Oh, you go. I'm Terry Prince. I'll go after you. I don't mind. You go first.
Okay. Wait. Yep. Yes. So I'm Colin Whitlatch. I'm the CTO of Kahua, and just want to say a couple things quickly here. One, appreciate just being able to make some public comments here. But in the FedRAMP, just my comment is in the FedRAMP program, the federal government and all the CSPs, cloud service providers, we've all invested heavily in the creation of the processes and the technology that provide a secure environment in which the agencies that use it are able to execute on their capital programs. We're very proud and excited to be part of the program. We've been so since we got authorized in early 2022, started our journey back in 2018. We're concerned, however, that we are seeing many agencies that are acquiring non-FedRAMP solutions for basically their project management systems, or they're just not mandating to their contractors that they need to be utilizing systems that are authorized. And we see that this circumvention of the rules, it does create security vulnerabilities for all of us, and also results in inefficiencies, which ultimately we can't provide the best possible pricing due to what we have to absorb. To go a little further in that, on the vulnerability risk, it's significant. We see, FedRAMP exists to promote secure solutions. And without a framework in place, there are either ad hoc controls or sometimes no controls at all. And this can be catastrophic. And we've seen that in the industry when there's solutions out there that just have open issues and there's just no way to get it resolved without anything in place to enforce it, such as FedRAMP. And on the inefficiencies, there's business cost to FedRAMP, and we have to do data calls. We still have to respond to those when they're for these other systems and things that come up. That's something that our team has to continually go and track down. We know based on FedRAMP, we do have our, things like our inventory, what we're gonna have in place, and also our protocols, but we still have to go through the exercise of working on them. And those that have done data calls know that some of these could be pretty intense and a lot of work involved. So, to sum this up, we believe that the mission of FedRAMP is critical, and that if there was tighter enforcement of the adoption of FedRAMP solutions, that should be a priority. Thank you.
Hey, Colin, this is Matt from NIST. What was your company? What were you CTO of? I missed that. I'm sorry.
I'm CTO of Kahua.
Thank you. Got it.
Yep.
Okay.
all right, thank you, Colin. Terry, if you would like to go ahead.
Yes, thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
Okay. Good afternoon, FedRAMP Cloud Advisory Committee members and those who have joined virtually. Thank you for having me. I'm Terry Prince, CEO of the Terita Companies, the tiny WOSB of 10 worldwide in the US, Canada, and Brussels. Many of you remember me from previous comments at these events. In fact, I spoke at the very first of these events in 2023. We've been in the IT solutions business for more than 20 years, and personally, for me, 50 years. And I've had a connection to FedRAMP that may be the deepest of any organization, as we made our commitment to FedRAMP standards in 2017 and never wavered from that goal. I like to say that what we've done is completed what I call the full FedRAMP 3PA of Monty. Pre-readiness, RAR 1, RAR 2, the czar, and an agency ATO from the United States Senate. But then we come to the real crux of the matter for cloud service providers. The FedRAMP security standard for cloud computing has been around since 2011. Our company worked since 2017 for FedRAMP approval for several $1 million. Since 2011, only about 400 organizations have gained FedRAMP approval. And of the area in which we work, platform as a service, 2011 till now, only 48 have been approved. Obviously, up until now, FedRAMP certification has been a bureaucratic nightmare of expense and delay. FedRAMP is the law, yet it's been dependent on a delivery model where cloud service providers require a very particular invitation process to take part. The nice way to say it is that it's a regressive policy that has limited FedRAMP success and means FedRAMP certifications are dominated by large prime contractors. In our NICS code, a small business is really a very large business. To read it with 10 people worldwide is literally the smallest organization to ever qualify for FedRAMP. What bothers me about this process is it reminds me of the days when one was invited to a dance and they couldn't dance until they had somebody ask them to dance. Fortunately, not all FedRAMP news is bad. FedRAMP, working with NIST frameworks and the Department of Defense, has expanded routes to certification and established equivalency of certification standards and various constituent groups. TRITA can then therefore use our ATO for certifications by this alternate path and by inherited controls for what I call the self-nominated. They will no longer be required to get an invitation to apply and can, via the TRITA framework and digital clones and inherited controls, platform as a service, move forward.
Hey, Terry, you're out of time, unfortunately.
I will provide the remainder of my talk by comment, but I would like to say that our goal is to certify
Terry,
more than 1,000 organizations in the next month.
I'm sorry, you are out of time. We do need to move on to another.
No, you don't. There's no one waiting.
There is an entire agenda waiting. And we
let's
are open for
speaker,
public
Susan.
comment in writing. And we've had a lot of great public comment in writing, and we read them all. We appreciate the hearing from the public. Absolutely.
Yeah, and you haven't.
Thank you. Susan, please go ahead and speak.
Yes, hello, I'm Sue Schultz-Searcy from Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation. I will keep this very brief. One of the cloud service providers we are working with has started telling us that they are experiencing challenges in being able to procure a third-party assessment organization. They've said that many of the 3 PALs have so much work that they have that they're not able to bid on new work. I was not sure, we've not heard this before, so I just wanted to put that out there to see if other cloud providers are having issues with that or other agencies are hearing that. Thank you.
All right, thank you so much. Are there any other public comments? As discussed, I'm sorry. Great. Thank you so much for your public comments. And this really concludes this portion of the agenda. We will now go ahead and jump into our topic of chair remarks. Larry, welcome as this committee chair. Would you like to I would like to invite you to make any remarks you'd like at this time. I will be happy to answer any FACA related questions that come up. Larry, please go ahead.
Thanks, Michelle. And again, thanks for the public comments. We do have a full agenda today, and we have received a lot more public comments in writing through the portal, thanks to committee members and others amplifying the message that we do want to hear from you. And certainly if it's, if it's a detailed comment, we welcome the written comments and appreciate that very much. To quickly recap our July meeting, we further refined our top priorities and decided to begin developing recommendations for these first two listed on this slide. I'll give everyone a minute to reread these. We were given an additional 2 priorities from the GSA administrator, specifically to 1, identify best practices and recommendations on how FedRAMP can make progress with commercial reciprocity using different security frameworks. And 2, identify what is needed to support OSCAL adoption, and if there are any barriers to OSCAL interoperability within the CSP and agency GRC ecosystem that need to be addressed. Due to the nature of the content needed and the timeline of these on FedRAMP's roadmap, we agreed to pause working on these right now and address them after working on these 2 initial priorities first. As discussed in our last meeting, we're in the discovery phase of developing our recommendations. So in terms of today's agenda, our focus will be twofold. 1, on understanding the impact of OMB's FedRAMP memo released on August 1. And 2, hearing from FedRAMP stakeholders, both industry and agency, on their experiences and challenges with the current FedRAMP authorization process. These 2 points will help us in our next meeting further discuss and develop a structure for our report to the administrator and subsequently recommendations on these 2 initial priorities. While we receive information from OMB and FedRAMP stakeholders today, please be sure to take notes on any specific key information you'd like to capture. This is to the committee members. You'd like to capture and or highlight in our report to the administrator. And at the end of this meeting, we'll capture those takeaways that we'd potentially like to add to the initial draft report in preparation for deliberations in our next meeting. Does anyone have any questions before we proceed? All right, great. One more quick update for everyone. FSCAC looked into getting the social media handles for this committee, specifically X and LinkedIn platforms. Unfortunately, GSA is not adding more accounts to X at this time due to some issues with the platform. However, we will be getting a LinkedIn account to help further amplify our requests for public comment and announce our upcoming meetings, in addition to the Federal Register as required by FSCAC, which is great news. Once we have those set up, we'll be sure to pass along for further information. Last but not least, I want to make sure that everyone saw the announcement that FedRAMP has a new director, Pete Waterman, who's on the call today. So welcome, Pete. Pete, if you'd like to say a few words to the committee, I'm happy to share the floor with you.
Fantastic. Thanks, Larry. I would love to. Hey, everyone. I'm Pete. This is my 13th day as the FedRAMP director, but it is my 5th year dealing with the reality of compliance and security and all of the complex governance laws, policies, and regulations that make things a little bit more difficult for those of us in government to do actions that those of us in private sector take for granted. My first couple of months in government, I'm embarrassed to say I once proudly stated that I could move an entire department into the cloud in a week by setting up staging environments and starting that process. And then I was like, what's this thing called an ATO? What's this thing called FSMA? And next thing I knew, I had this giant whiteboard full of like the 50 people I would have to talk to get approvals. And like, that's not even putting in the work. That's just getting the signatures. So I know how real this is. I know how complicated it is. On the flip side, I know what you all are doing. I recently was riding a motorcycle across the country to come back to DC when I found out I had this job, and recordings of these meetings on YouTube basically got me across like Idaho, Montana, North Dakota, and Minnesota over the course of multiple days. So thank you for that. The thing I'd like to just really lean into for you all is the reminder that you have an unprecedented opportunity to propose and take meaningful actions and measures to improve our community. This is important to me because I believe you can have the biggest impact by focusing specifically on actions that are directed at the entire community to bring the community together rather than on a single portion of the community. There are at least two things that are really on my mind related to this where I think you are best positioned to help. And the first is communication and collaboration on a technical level. This is the first technical community I've been a part of where I don't have a place where I can see years and years of technical discussion about a control or an implementation or how some code works, like just out there on some forum or website to reference. Instead, it's all hidden behind 500-page PDFs and LinkedIn posts and things like that. It's not accessible. It's not in the open. How do we get the technical people in our community, the engineers that are doing the work, that it's unreasonable to say, pull up this 500-page document, memorize it, and then go do all the things in it, right? Like that's not how we work at the technical level. How can we build a community where people go and talk amongst themselves? That's something that's difficult for me to do as the federal government. But if you give me direction on where to go to participate in those communities, I will work with my Office of Strategic Communication and all of my other stakeholders to make that happen so we can interact directly with you instead of only occasionally at big fancy events with a bunch of suits in the room. Second thing on my mind, and this again, you are all uniquely positioned for this. This is one of the hardest things for me going from private sector to government was understanding how different things are. The most expensive steak I've ever eaten was paid for by a vendor that my company had just paid millions of dollars to, and he took me out to dinner to celebrate, and that is 100% okay in private sector. That's the way things work. It's personal, right? It's personal relationships. You hire someone because of their personal relationships and what they can get you. We leverage personal relationships in the industry so much. Can't do that in government. I can't interact with someone as Pete Waterman. I have to be the FedRAMP director. This is very complicated. It's something that I think a lot of industry doesn't understand and struggles with. And it's something that a lot of government folks don't understand and can easily get in traps. So one of the things I would also really appreciate from you all is guidance, like on that, just to help this community understand. So private sector isn't expecting the same thing out of other industry folks from us, and we're not expecting the same thing out of other government folks from them. Like we need to understand how this all works. Please help me with that. So I don't know if I went over my time there, Larry, but those are the two things that are really on my mind where you can do something that I just can't do running my organization inside the government as a representative of government.
Pete, I don't think this community or this committee can hear enough from you. So really do appreciate it. Welcome to your new role. We're thrilled to have you. And Michelle, for chair remarks, that's it for me for today. So please take us on to the next. And Michelle, if you're speaking, you may be on mute.
Hey, this is Ashley Mahan. I can't hear Michelle either, but I am happy to present some slides with my colleague Laura, who's on the line from OMB as well. Just need access to be able to present my screen. So whoever may be the person that's showing that or the meeting owner, feel free to transfer screen share access to me, or whoever is sharing their screen, if you wouldn't mind. Stop sharing your screen and then I might be able to get in there and do it. Awesome. Fantastic. I saw that mouse moving. Appreciate that, Larry, if that was you or whoever that was.
No, that was Darcy.
Darcy, thanks so much. Let me go ahead and get this teed up. And I think there was a hand raised. Was there a hand raised or was that something?
Sorry, Ashley, I'm hitting buttons.
Totally good. Okay. Well, want to make sure, can everyone see my screen? Can you all give me a thumbs up, or Larry, if you can give me a thumbs up?
Yeah,
great.
We see your screen.
Fantastic. Thanks, everybody. I'm going to turn this over to Laura. Go ahead, Laura.
Thanks, Ashley, and good afternoon, everyone. I am Laura Gerhardt. I'm the Director of Technology Modernization and Data here at the Office of the Federal Chief Information Officer. And we just released M2410, which modernizes FedRAMP, and really excited to be here. And really, the intent overall of the memo is to help agencies accelerate, online, and unlock resources to deliver on mission in a modern way. And next slide, please. And also, do you mind moving over into present mode, Ashley? Fantastic. And advance the slide. So with the updated memo, we're really trying to drive to an overall future of FedRAMP where we have an improved customer experience, stronger security and risk management, and reduced time and cost to accomplishing the FedRAMP authorization. So when we talk about improved customer experience, we really want to make sure we're talking about a more straightforward authorization path for cloud service providers and agencies, helping facilitate better transparency and what the process will be, as well as also a better transparency and accessibility of FedRAMP authorization packages to agencies when they want to leverage those FedRAMP authorizations. We're also working with the FedRAMP team to ensure that there's more engagement with a larger technical program staff to help support all the efforts and modernization within the memo. And we also really want to make sure that the program is responsive to customer challenges. And in fact, in the intent of the memo, really taking advantage of the fact that the memo is now operating in an environment where there's considerably more SaaS offerings, where there previously had been, with the original memo, really primarily IaaS offerings. Next, really focusing on driving stronger security and risk management. While the memo and the statute talks about the presumption of adequacy, we really want to make sure that all of FedRAMP customers and are engaged in improving the cybersecurity across the federal enterprise and making sure that the security authorization or the FedRAMP authorizations meet those security expectations, as well as, can adapt to novel architectures and as well as complex configurations, and also that there may be emerging and novel threats within the course of a FedRAMP authorization. So being responsive to that and driving that security first mentality within FedRAMP. Then in particular, really making sure that those outcomes are rooted in real world security needs, prioritizing authorization requirements that really drive toward security requirements, and where we can find efficiencies in reducing some of the ones that are really more compliance oriented than security oriented. And as we're operating within this more security first model, moving toward a more data-driven risk management approaching, especially with some of our automation efforts that I'll talk about shortly, moving toward how can we talk about aggregated risks, where can we measure risk, and where can we, look at quantifiable risk reductions and risk mitigations to sort of support that enterprise approach within FedRAMP. We also really want to make sure that this new FedRAMP process and ecosystem reduces the time and cost in order to meet these security objectives. So you'll have heard probably a lot around automate.fedramp.gov, but we're really trying to move to a fully automated ecosystem where there's automated processing for creating, sharing, and assessing, as well as reviewing authorization packages, and helping make sure that those authorization packages are now digital authorization packages that move through the ecosystem via APIs rather than, large document-based artifacts. We also want to make sure that our reviews are thoughtful and applicable, and looking at places that we can streamline reviews where other agencies have already demonstrated high quality assessments and reviews. And then we really want to better support reuse of authorization packages, in part through leveraging the automation, but also facilitating adoption assets that can help an agency looking to leverage a new package build on from both a security and a delivery perspective faster. Next slide, please, Ashley. And really, we're trying to drive this through one FedRAMP authorization and increasing reuse. So within the memo, we outline multiple authorization paths within the new FedRAMP authorization construct. In particular, we're continuing with agency authorizations, but these authorizations are now allowed to be either single agency or multiple agency authorizations. We've also introduced the concept of a program authorization. This will be run by Pete's team over at GSA, the FedRAMP team, granting an authorization for this. We've also introduced the notion that the FedRAMP board over the course and the life of this memo may find new opportunities for authorization paths. And so we want to support that creativity and that novelty that may arise in the life of this memo to support the creation with the approval of the board of an additional authorization path. I touched on this a bit, but just wanted to highlight more again, driving reuse through the presumption of adequacy. This means that the controls and the assessments documented within a FedRAMP authorization should be presumed adequate within reuse. And we really see this as an all stakeholder approach in order to get there. In particular, we know that we need initial assessments to really meet a standard of quality so that others can feel comfortable with that presumption, and also making sure that there's an expectation within the agencies that when they see an artifact within an authorization package, that they presume those adequate. We've also introduced some procedures within the memorandum on how, when an agency identifies a package that they don't believe should be presumed adequate, how they can respond that back to the FedRAMP team to address those deficiencies. We also believe in terms of increasing federal authorizations that we need to be taking a look at what a lot of our commercial cloud offerings are already doing, which is leveraging existing external security frameworks where possible. In particular, we're looking at systems where there'd be a low impact level, but where a FedRAMP authorization may take advantage of existing work, or in some cases, implementations to achieve a FedRAMP authorization. And finally, digging a little bit more into this notion of the digital authorization package. As we mentioned, the memo outlines leveraging the open control protocol that developed by NIST, OSCAL, to be able to submit as well as transmit digital authorization packages both to the FedRAMP PMO and to agencies. We've also introduced an agency requirement that within, I believe, 2 years, agencies will need to be able to both produce and ingest OSCAL digital authorization packages, so we can move to this future where this automation is part and foundational to managing the federal FedRAMP ecosystem. And with that, want to thank you all, and I believe open it up for questions. All right, Bill.
Yeah, I will say
Oh.
that we were going to go ahead and move directly into the FedRAMP response to the memo.
Oh,
And then
okay, I'm so sorry. Yep, go ahead.
No, apologies. But with that, I would like to welcome Pete Waterman back to the floor so that we can have him go through as the new director of FedRAMP to talk about FedRAMP's reaction to the memo and its impact.
Fantastic. Why don't you go ahead and jump to the next slide here. So as I'm sure everyone knows, everybody had a draft version of this memo well in advance, right? And so obviously we've been doing a lot of work preparing for what the real memo would be like. That includes beginning and taking a number of actions to set us up for success when that memo comes out. I'm not going to go through all of them in detail. I think our roadmap is pretty well published, and looking forward to updating people on that. But the key thing related to that is, as Laura mentioned, program authorization. And that memo really gives us the directive to develop the program authorization path. And that is something we are 100% leaning into. that is that the process of developing such a new path is complex and requires a lot of stakeholder alignment. So we'll be working through that and sharing and following the processes put on us in various policies, law, et cetera, to communicate with the appropriate folks on that as we move forward. We've also established the FedRAMP board. I think if you follow the blog, you've seen that. We had another really big all-day meeting last week with some really cool stuff. We're hoping over the coming weeks to be releasing some guidance and some incentives from the board on how some of those like really, really knowledgeable folks interpret and execute some of their responsibilities related to FedRAMP. You could go ahead and move to the next slide. One super exciting thing, obviously, is that we've increased our technical capacity. I know that you hear this a lot. The FedRAMP team is a lot of people, and on the Fed side, we've really staffed up in a way that is very unusual for a federal team. Hiring is difficult. Informally, sort of. I'll indicate I knew I was going to have this job in May, and I didn't start until the end of August, and that is considered incredibly, incredibly quick. Everything about that hiring process was incredibly quick because I worked at GSA a year ago. Getting staff into government takes a long time, and we've done a lot to like get this as quick as possible and build up this capacity. We also are sending out to a few of our partners over the next week or two notification that they have been selected for an agile delivery pilot around significant change requests. That's the first round of people. We're going to be rolling more of those in, and we'll be reporting on that as it goes forward. And of course, the work, going back to my rant or earlier in the meeting, right? Automate.fedramp.gov is one of our attempts to start to establish some sort of DevRel style interaction with our community. Please amplify that. Tell us how we can do it better. Tell us what more we can do. I am, fingers crossed, hoping to start doing that type of involvement beyond just code and into some other aspects of the way we do work. So I'm very excited about that. And the OMB memo lets us do all that and direct people to support us and help us do it, which is super exciting. I think that's the last slide. Is that right? There you go. Thank you so much. We're just very excited to finally have that memo and be able to execute towards it. But as always, I'll just gently remind my community related to my thing earlier, just because OMB puts out a memo saying that we need to do something, the act of actually turning our ship is complex and it takes a while. And we're working very closely with OMB to do that, but it doesn't mean that we get to immediately do all the stuff day one. We're working towards it, and that is our North Star. Thank you.
Great. I do appreciate that. Now move straight into our committee Q&A, where I'll ask members to please raise their hands during the time. I will call on you to unmute yourself and ask your question. Please note that we do have a hard stop at 1:15 for this agenda item. And with that, do we have any questions? Bill, go ahead and ask your question.
Hey, everybody. First off, Pete, wonderful to have you in that seat. When I saw your name pop up, I could not have been more ecstatic to have you sitting there. Wonderful to have you in federal service here and at the head of the program. I have all the confidence in the world of you all doing an excellent job under your leadership. So first off, great to have you here. Second, Ashley and Laura, how's it going? Long time no see. Awfully weird being on reverse sides of the desk here. But super, super cool to have you all heading things up over on the other side of the fence. Super wonderful. I think that the new memo has some wonderful things in there. I really appreciated you all taking so much of the positive feedback from the community and from this committee into account there. And I think it's a radical improvement from where we were. Love to see the acceleration of, the automation, all of that sort of stuff that you all have already heard me preaching about for 6 years now. So all good things on that front. But there's the one thing that I have to talk about. And I'm sorry, but it's a public forum. We got to talk about it. And that's the exception process. I was extremely disappointed that OMB ignored the advice of this committee on the exception process. For those of you in the audience who don't know what I'm talking about, there used to be an exception process by which federal agencies could basically tell OMB that for whatever reason, we're using a tool that is a cloud-based tool, and we can't take it through the FedRAMP authorization process at this time. And as a result, we're still going to be using it because we need it to fulfill a critical aspect of our mission. It's not giving a free pass to everybody, but it was a way around that. Now, in the new memo, of course, there is a very limited series of categories of exemptions, but it's really tiny. It's very narrow. And so that presents a big problem for a lot of us. First and foremost, as I've already commented in this forum before, this puts a bunch of small businesses at a significant disadvantage, which is a comment we're hearing over and over and over again from these public comment periods that we've got. We've got a bunch of new comments that came in on this topic. Not everyone as a small business can afford to take their product through the FedRAMP authorization process. They don't have that kind of money. They don't have the guaranteed other side of this of people who are going to want to buy it on day one, but there are a couple of federal agencies that do. And again, this doesn't fit into your exemption categories as currently defined. It's a major gap. Large businesses have the same problem. There's a lot of new tools that the cloud providers are putting out that are not FedRAMP authorized yet, and that some of us need. And again, to reiterate, when I was running ops at the Small Business Administration at the beginning of the pandemic, we leaned on that heavily to be able to achieve our mission in the time of the pandemic. There wasn't another way to do that. We didn't have 9 months to wait for a FedRAMP authorization to come through. So that was awfully critical. And then the third piece, which again, I now am a small agency. I've gone from the largest civilian agency to one of the tiniest agencies in government. We don't have the kind of budget to take something through the FedRAMP authorization process, and we need these tools to execute our mission. It's absolutely critical that we have these, and we have no path forward here as a result. So I was very curious as to what OMB's advice is to those of us who fall into these categories. How are we expected to proceed given that there's no way forward for us? And these are tools that we are using today, not a future potential thing. This is something that's currently a problem in the environment that I personally run. How are we supposed to proceed forward here? But again, I want to reiterate, this is the sandwich compliment. Y'all are doing a great job. I know how tough it is to make policy. I've sat over there. I understand what goes on with it. I understand that there's an inherent cynicism that people are going to game the system if you provide too many outs for them. I get all of that. I appreciate the tough position you all are in, but really, I just need to know, how are we supposed to move forward here?
Yeah, thanks, Bill, and appreciate you sharing this. I know you've shared this feedback in forums, and so it's great to hear from you. I think first we start out with sort of the notion and the intent of the NDAA and the FedRAMP Authorization Act, which cites that, tasks OMB with issuing guidance that includes requirements for agencies to obtain a FedRAMP authorization when operating a cloud computing product or service as defined within the scope. And so part of our key, and one of the really more thoughtful conversations we had throughout the development in this memo, was really making sure that the scope was appropriate. And one of the things that we found in the process and in navigating that was actually, looking at the intent of the legislation and how broad the scope really would be with that. And so we tried as best we could to balance that scope. And so the reflection of what you see the scope is really, with all the public comment, with all the additional review, and as well as a lot of agency input and great feedback from the FSCAC as a result of those conversations to match the intent of the legislation as well as the policy requirements and input we received. So within that, you'll also see some exemptions within the scope. And in particular, we also do realize that there's novelty in there. And one of the things that the prior memo did was allow that to be an agency determination, really, whether or not there was an exemption. And so one of the things we've included here is really shifted that responsibility over to the newly created FedRAMP board. So in particular, we're really looking at to be more categorical, in which that the FedRAMP board can then receive requests of this is a category of cloud services we believe would be out of scope for that. So in particular, we encourage you to for the cloud services you believe that might not meet that, work with the board and engage with the board around how you might sort of say, this is why we believe this would be an additional exemption. So that is sort of first and foremost. In terms of the additional sort of path forward, we've also included, it's not an immediate thing, right? We included wanting to have that really on-road to FedRAMP, especially for these small businesses. We also know that as an agency, when you're starting to explore a capability, immediately saying, hey, you got to FedRAMP this, it can deter some both agencies from moving forward with new innovative products, and also can be sort of a detractor for the CSPs themselves. So in particular, we've created that we allow federal agencies to pilot new cloud services that don't yet have federal authorizations. In the memo, we've tasked FedRAMP to develop procedures for time-specific temporary authorizations in which you'd be able to really take the first 12 months to say, is this a product we'd like to move through FedRAMP? And then start to move through FedRAMP with the expectation, if you continue to move forward with the product, consistent with sort of the overall, if it's in scope, to move forward with the authorization. And then finally, I think one of the things as part of that, as we move forward, is really how can we look at reducing the time and cost for low services, right? Looking at automation, leveraging better reciprocity, taking advantage of those external frameworks, and potentially, leveraging where we might FedRAMP tailored to really support, for where appropriate, to be making a more flexible process as appropriate for those CSPs. So that's at a high level what I would recommend to agencies faced with what you shared with us today.
I really appreciate that feedback again. I think you all have put a lot of thought into this. I just, want to reiterate, I think that's insufficient for this situation. That's the reality of what we're dealing with in the market today. The categorical based sort of system that you all are using is anti-competitive, because it means that rather than saying this entire, you have to say that this entire swath of products is basically exempt. And that means that just the big competitors that are in the market, you're not going to exempt them because they've already gone through. So instead, it means that these other products that may be similar, that are coming from smaller vendors, can't compete in the larger market. So I don't think that really gets to the end that you all were intending there. And I think that that's somewhat problematic. And again, the other problem here, of course, is that, again, a small agency like us, we can't take something through the FedRAMP authorization. We don't have that kind of funding. Certainly not in the next couple of budget years, looking how grim things are. It's simply impossible for us. So we have to sit around and either wait for another agency to go through it, or find another round here. So I'm not going to filibuster the rest of this meeting on this. I think you all know my strong opinion on the matter, but I really, really would urge OMB to go back, reconsider the evidence and information that was put forward by this committee and the public comment period, and consider revising this as quickly as possible. Because again, I think that this is really anti-competitive to a lot of the small businesses and to us small agencies. And that's a real problem in us achieving our mission.
Appreciate your feedback, Bill.
But y'all are great. I think you're awesome. I'm sorry I had to say this out loud.
Kayla, you have a hand up?
Yes. I just wanted to, Kayla from HackerOne, I just wanted to add in noticing that if we're talking about organizations who are at the low impact level, I just did a quick count in the marketplace, and from the marketplace, it looks like there's 8 out of 494 entries in products in the marketplace that are low impact. And of course, there's probably more outside of that. It's just what I was doing a quick search for. So I realized that, if we're that does provide a good scope, a small scope to start with for some of these things, but that might not be the most, if I could see how moving to LISAS might help too for some of those efforts to work through. Just from the sheer size, if there's only 8 low impact. And most of the conversations I have with people, it even is like, almost, why do LISAS? You might as well do moderate. So just from a sheer numbers perspective, I thought I'd raise that.
Yeah, thank you for raising that. And partly, I think that's a reflection of how many barriers there have been to sort of achieving LISAS, right? That's a reflection of the current state. And part of what some of the things we're hoping to do is incentivize, where it does make sense to move up to LISAS. Also, one thing that's noted within the memorandum is that agencies can always uplift a package, if there's a license package, they can then take that and always add additional controls within their own authorization. In particular, you could also take a moderate and ATO, work with the CSP to ATO it to high. We view that as also part of this broader on-ramping conversation as a springboard, so that additional work, once you've gotten to LISAS, potentially you can go to moderate as appropriate, either starting with the agency and then potentially that can be really facilitate your eventual jump over to FedRAMP moderate. So appreciate that reflection, and hopefully that is a reflection of how things have been and helping support us and some of the incentives that we can help build in this new memorandum.
Okay, great, thank you. Do any of our committee members have any questions for either OMB or FedRAMP?
Hi, this is Matt from NIST. I'll jump in just on a small one. There was a small issue, or not an issue, an ad in the assessing security postures around red teaming. Assessments will include reviewing documentation and may also involve intensive expert-led red team assessments at any point during or following the authorization process. Were there thoughts on when that may also be triggered, or what might be the events that would trigger that may, and then how the results from a red team may or may not be included in the assessment, the authorization, or the continuation of an authorization? I'm just curious as to what the kind of the concept of the use, or the when that may become active in a red team activity.
Yeah, that's a fantastic question. So I can speak more to the intent of the red teaming expectations. I think one of the things, we want to make sure as an objective as we move to really validating the security authorization or security practices present within a CSP is we want to make sure that it reflects as operating production systems. And we want to make sure that we're validating the complex architectures in situ effectively. And so we want to make sure that in the course of the assessment, as well as following an assessment and following the issuing an authorization, that there's really the FedRAMP team can sort of attest to the real world security of that CSP. Regarding the specific procedures and some of the questions you have of when that might occur, going forward, GSA, the board, and CISA will be operating in order to understand and set sort of guidance and requirements and when that might happen. I'd also note within the memorandum, we've created the concept of special reviews, and the intent there too is if there's a novel security vulnerability or a novel sort of broad threat within the federal enterprise, that we want to make sure that FedRAMP can do its due diligence from a cybersecurity perspective to mitigate some of those risks, or at best do the due diligence of forensic understanding and incident response of those events within a CSP that's authorized.
Okay, so still maybe a little TBDs on who provides that expert red team. Is it the 3PAO or the CSP or CISA, and or fleshing out what expert means or doesn't mean in order to make that applicable? Is that still work to be kind of specified?
I think that would be more or less accurate. It's worth noting that the director would draw on the technical expertise within the federal government and as necessary. And along with that is, as the FSCAC, as these conversations proceed, we'd really encourage the FSCAC to provide thoughts that you all have in terms of making sure that this is successful.
Thanks. Okay.
Great. Kayla, you have another question?
Yes, I do. So I was actually curious how the reaction has been for your office from federal agencies in the topic of the presumption of adequacy, because I believe that that's kind of one of the big changes for this new memo. And I've certainly heard a lot of conversation around it's going to be a journey for sure for federal agencies to be comfortable with this. So I was just wondering if you guys had any stories or insights or general categories of how the reactions you've heard from agencies here. And I hope we get to talk about this a little bit as a committee later on today too, but I figured for the guests we have here, I'd love that.
I'll share, there are agencies that were already approaching FedRAMP with this. I've heard FedRAMP has a strong brand, and this is how we already approach authorizations. I've heard some folks, a lot of our conversations are clarity sort of within the package review and the expectations. And we're having a lot of conversations about how we better clarify that for agencies, because the notion, tactically, there's a lot of diversity right now in when agencies issue their ATOs, and we facilitate a lot of those questions. And so we understand that it's on us to sort of better provide that clarity for where they're not quite sure they're getting it. But I would say that we've also, seen a lot of enthusiasm for sort of validating some of the approaches that have already been present within agencies.
And Kayla, I love that question. It's also something that we're being very proactive on here at OMB and working with the FedRAMP team. We're conducting agency roadshows. We've done, quite a few thus far, have some more lined up in the next couple months. And those forums are exactly the right spot where they are asking those questions, right? And we're, kind of going through the memo like we did today. And so, yeah, presumption of adequacy has been one. We're working closely with the FedRAMP team on that. And just know it's, in essence of, really from the way that I look at it is really building trust, right? In all the products that have achieved FedRAMP authorization, maintain that FedRAMP authorization, so we can really scale and drive home that reuse factor, right? Because that reuse factor in agencies that do once use many principle is really that magic, right? One of the many magic pieces to FedRAMP where agencies can reuse the materials that have already been developed, that have already been included in the FedRAMP marketplace quickly to issue their reciprocal ATOs at their agencies. So a great question, great topic that we're continuing to work on, get information from agencies, and work closely with the FedRAMP PMO on moving forward. So thank you.
Can I jump in on that real quick? I apologize. I'm talking too much, but I want to reemphasize.
This is Matt from NIST.
Yeah, thank you, Larry. This is Matt from NIST. Thanks, Larry. Like all good committees, I'm going to say what Ashley said, but say it again. My understanding at the very start of FedRAMP, when this was kind of getting put together with Vivek Kundra, was this is the intent of the program, is to have this presumption of adequacy and this reciprocal ATO to enable to scale across the agencies. So anything and everything that OMB can put on paper in memo as policy to assist with agencies in acceptance of and ease of their kind of business and compliance risk concerns that allows them to accept and conduct a presumption of adequacy of another ATO is excellent. One of the things in the email is, hey, presumption of adequacy, but this does not absolve you of your FSMA responsibilities within your agency as well. So yes, presume adequacy, but you're also responsible is kind of a little bit within the, the same paragraph of the memo. So anything OMB can do to say, presumption of adequacy also meets your compliance and business risk needs as those department heads, I think would also really help with that, that reciprocal ATO as well.
Thanks, Matt. Always appreciate the feedback and the sentiment. So thank you.
Anyone else from the committee? Questions for FedRAMP?
I think, Michelle, just to close it up from our end, like just many thanks to the committee for your time today. And greatly appreciate the opportunity to brief you all today, and then turning over to Laura for any closing remarks.
Yeah, and you all, I believe, know how to find us, but we really believe that this should be a continued partnership, and really grateful for the work that you all are doing and the work you did in terms of getting this memo here. And so just please continue to stay engaged, and thank you for having us today and giving us this opportunity.
Okay, great. Well, much. I really appreciate and
Hey, Michelle,
everything.
I don't think it's just me. I think we're all having a hard time with your audio.
Sorry about is this better?
That's a little better. Yes, thanks.
All right, great. We are ready for our break. We will take a 15-minute break. Please be back by 1:30 for us to reconvene.
Thanks, everybody.
All right, welcome back from break. We will now move on to our first panel discussion for today. We have Jim McCartney from Global Telehealth Services, Brian De Silva from Mark 43, and Tom Suter from ATARC, who are here to talk to us about their experiences and challenge within the FedRAMP authorization process. With that, I would like to go ahead and hand it over to the team. But as in our previous panels, this is a panel designed to be less formal and more conversational. We have asked our speakers today to respond to several guiding questions about their experience working with FedRAMP. Committee members are invited to ask additional questions they may have for these industry representatives during the conversation by raising your hand, and I'll call on everyone in the order that they raise their hands. Anyone have any questions before we start? All right, great. With that, Jim, Brian, and Tom, thank you for joining us today. Feel free to turn on your video if you'd like, and unmute yourselves whenever you would like to respond to the committee. Would any one of you like to kick us off by starting to share how your experience has been working with FedRAMP?
I nominate James.
Thanks, Tom. We were authorized in July, but I've heard a lot of conversations around the process and everything, and I think to understand kind of some of our perspective, it helps for me to give you a quick rundown of what our path was to getting FedRAMP authorized, because we found just about every loophole and crack you could fall through in the process. So we were approached by a company was approached by VA at the start of the pandemic as something they wanted us to go through FedRAMP so they could be used in facilities. And there was some naive thought that there was, because of the pandemic, it could be sped up and got through quickly. The fact that we got authorized in July says that that didn't quite happen that way. The company did not get a 3PAO to help us out and do the consulting side. We did it ourselves. And we actually successfully completed our first assessment with both a RAR and a SAR in August of 21. They were submitted to, but when we went to submit it all, when the 3PAO went to submit it all, the PMO said, no, we want the RAR. We don't want to see the SAR until after you have the agency ATO. We got our RAR review in December of 21. Took us until June of 22 to get our ATO, and we got put on the list to go through our SAR review by September of 22, and they said at that point it would be 4 to 6 weeks, and we had our SAR review in December of 22. Mind you, all the work we done on the RAR, from the RAR review, none of that got incorporated because we did it all at the same time. And so, but by the time we're doing the SAR review, the lot had changed. Additionally, we had, from the very beginning, we had some changes we wanted to make, but we were told, hey, you can't make any changes until after you finish your SAR review. So we're now sitting, so we go through there and we get to the SAR review and they say, well, it's been a really long time since your assessment. You need to go through another full assessment. We said, okay. But then because we weren't technically in the FedRAMP program like that, even though we had been, we got moved in processing, but then by the time we also fell off the marketplace because we outside of periodicity, even though we had no control of that. But we then went back, got the significant change approved by the agency, went through it, but we were under tremendous pressure to do another assessment. So we were doing our assessment, or we were still finishing our change as we did our assessment. But that got done in August of, it was submitted in November of 23. We didn't go through the process. We didn't, and then we had 3 SAR review meetings to finally get approved in July of 24. So we hit all kinds of, and then again, we're right back into it because now we have another significant change trying to get approved. So we've had it's been a challenge, but I will say I don't begrudge any of it because the way I look at it is, offering our product needs to be as our commitment has to be at the same level as any federal agency. And one of my experiences was I helped write a business continuity plan for Ginnie Mae, and this was after the housing bubble, and they obviously were very sensitive about making sure that they were doing their job. And so thinking of the way I now think about it is the way our solution being offered is like it's being offered in the same way that Ginnie Mae making a payment on those MBS accounts. It's with the full faith and credit of the United States. And I just believe if you don't come at it to play at that level and play in that respect, you don't really belong coming to play in the FedRAMP space, because that's what has to be delivered for federal government and the services is there. So I've said a lot. I'm going to turn it over to Brian because he's got a whole nother set of challenges that he dealt with. And obviously there's more, but I just wanted to start with that piece.
Thanks, James. My experience was a little different. We were a little quicker to get overall authorized back in May of just a few months ago in May. Overall, I'd say working with the FedRAMP, during that process was a little touch and go in terms of some challenges in terms of the expectations from the three. We did actually hire a consulting company or a 3PAL to kind of consult us through this program, help build it, help us consult through it in order to get us to the point where we were ready to go in front of the 3PAL for that initial assessment, and then and obviously help us with the PMO review. By the time my feeling is that by the time we got to the PMO review, when we went through that and we got our first initial review, it was very much it was very evident that there was still a very big disconnect between what the 3PALs are assessing us on, even though it was like 8 months earlier, versus what the PMO is expecting us to deliver. And so we had a number of findings that I just couldn't imagine after having a consulting company come in, and we paid them to help us get to the point where our documentation was up to this, up to the adequacy that the FedRAMP expects. Then the 3PAL assesses us, which is basically assessing what the company just did, helped us get to the point where we needed to be assessed and get what we needed to get the ATO. But then by the time the PMO reviewed it, it seemed like there was just such a disconnect of how many findings we had. And I just can't, for me, that was really hard to see see how far the gap was. And in my mind, and I don't know really which bullet point this kind of hits on, but that's where I would see the vision of, in my hopes and dreams, maybe it's my hopes and dreams of eventually having a place where the 3PAL assesses you at the same level as the PMO. And it's kind of like that, that review should be exactly what the PMO should be expecting to look at. In my mind, we should be having the 3PAL look at us, and then the PMO is just really validating to that level of degree, but there shouldn't be that much of a disconnect that I found. So I'll maybe turn it over to Tom for his thoughts.
Thanks, gentlemen. I actually would like to ask both of you a question. Can you imagine a world if we didn't have FedRAMP? What would it mean to your companies if there wasn't one program like this? What if every agency did their own thing? How would that affect your business?
So for us, in some ways, it might have been easier. We were asked a number of times by the VA if we would our life would be so much, the VA's like, our life would be so much easier if you just put an instance of your platform inside of one of our data centers. And our answer was, well, that's great and it helps you, but we couldn't then do that and work with any other federal agency. So we made a very conscious choice that FedRAMP was absolutely the way to go because of what we're trying to do and where we're trying to go.
Great. Brian?
Yeah, I mean, I would want, we have an environment that's non-federal for our state and local agencies, and we hold ourselves to some, to a level of standard. So I would expect us to follow the same, level of standard, or have some baseline, using NIST, NIST as a framework, right? And in order to, provide kind of that attestation or of compliance that we meet the needs that, the agency is looking for. And certainly, and I think it's kind of, once you do that once, the whole point is to comply, test once, comply many, and allow agencies to be able to use your product as what FedRAMP intends to do, is create that central repository of, hey, they meet this need. You can have certainty, you can have a guarantee or certainty that they meet all the expected controls. But I still feel, just kind of double tapping off that, I still feel like there is a disconnect again in terms of talking. Now we're authorized, so now we're getting into the weeds with agencies who want to use our product, who want to buy our product, and it still seems like we're at the FedRAMP, we're FedRAMP High authorized, and we are talking to some large agencies, and they still don't understand how a high environment can have both a moderate and can have everything, can have a high, moderate, and low. One very, very large agency came to us and says, yeah, we see that you're high, but we really want you to build a moderate environment separately. And we said, why? Like, why wouldn't you want the more secure environment, in a high environment? And they thought they were taking on more risk by being in a high environment, even though they're going to issue an ATO at the moderate level. So that's just and that's not the only time that we've had this conversation with an agency around their confusion on what they need to do, how they need to, or how to buy our, how to use our product and use FedRAMP to their advantage.
Great. Well, for those of you who don't know me, I'm Tom Suter. I run an organization called the Advanced Technology Academic Research Center. We bring government, industry, and academia together to solve problems like cloud security. And I unlike these two soldiers on the front lines, I think we're more of the, if you equate it to the California gold rush, we're more supplying the pickaxes and the shovels. I deal with a lot of commercial companies, and my experience with FedRAMP was really right from the beginning. I got approached by Dave McClure, who ran the Office of Citizen Services. He had on his team Sunny Hashmi, Maria Rote, Sunny Bhagwalia, and Bajinder Paul, among others. It was a superstar team. I think the idea was very, very sound, and I think it's been overall great for the DoD and civilian agencies. I think that as we've gone along, I've seen some trends, and I see a lot of companies, almost every major company that's done FedRAMP is a member or has done work with us. I almost feel sorry, and I think that we don't talk business enough, but I almost feel sorry for the first team coming in that is getting FedRAMP, or they're trying to talk to the president of their company. We really, really, really need this FedRAMP, because it's going to take a lot longer than they think usually. It's going to be very, very expensive. And by the time they get their FedRAMP authorization, a lot of the times that federal team has lost their job. I mean, it seduces a lot of cost. And I think we really need to look at taking a lot of the cost out. So we worked with OSCAL. I mean, that was like 5 years ago when OSCAL project kind of kicked off. I don't know if we've really implemented that to its fullest extent. It is, I think we need to break down every aspect. I know ATARC, we have a continual ATO group that we just launched. Like the ATO process for an agency, that's very, very long. FedRAMP a lot of times is a subset of that. Why is it taking so long? What can we do? Do we need to ask for more resources? Through the years, I'm not saying right now, but through the years, I would ask the PMO, why don't you ask for more resources? And they almost like took it as a badge of honor that we work super hard. But it's if you had more resources, you wouldn't induce so much cost to the companies, because we have shorter turns. These gentlemen discussed the problem to quite an extent. I don't want to cover that, but the 3PAO program really needs to be looked at. it's really coalesced into a few of them that are suggestive sold. I kind of saw that from the beginning. It started out with a bunch of 3 PAOs. And part of supply chain risk management is you really want to keep a diversity of suppliers. And I think that a lot of the vendors don't have that. So you're kind of stuck with it, with several of them that won't be named on this program. And you really, they can kind of pick their price. And I think that how much it's going to cost up front is not, it ends up being a lot more, almost in every single case. Definitely got to continue working with agencies that if you have FedRAMP, that might cover what you need. And I was talking to a vendor the other day. Oh man, we got through FedRAMP. This is fantastic. Oh, you've got another year to get the ATO now because the FedRAMP controls aren't enough, and it's a whole big convoluted process. So we have to work with, I mean, the FedRAMP PMO has to work with these other agencies. What do you really need more than FedRAMP? But I think a consideration, it'd be good to see some metrics, like how much is it costing these companies? What can we do to make it easier to get these world-class technologies in use by the federal government? I see it in the DoD all the time. It's almost impossible to bring these Silicon Valley companies, all this software as a service. It's very difficult to bring it in the Department of Defense in particular. And it's like that in a lot of agencies. How can we really bring the software? The idea is to get the software through fast and safely and make sure it has the right security controls. I think we need to all be moving to that. So those are some of the things that I've seen. I've probably worked with 250, 300 companies that have dallied with FedRAMP. And I will say that I tell a lot of them, you're too early. You don't know what FedRAMP is. You shouldn't be doing my events. You're not ready. That's like the bar. You at least have to have something about FedRAMP in place to even do business with the federal government. So
Tom, I want to go on that.
Yeah.
Something you said, and this goes actually back to a couple of things that Pete talked about. And I think Pete did a really good job of kind of bringing to light some of the issues that, frankly, very few people, certainly not in Silicon Valley, but most people on the commercial side don't get, is what are the constraints on FedRAMP? What are the limits on them, and how quickly can they move? And Laura was talking about a lot of things that OMB is doing to try and move this faster. Yeah, but it's still going at government speed, and it's still, unfortunately, there's a reason for that, and it's actually valid. And as much as it might be nice to make it easier or simpler, at some measure, you still have to respond that you're working with the government. And I think it was the March meeting when somebody from OMB said, working with the federal government is not for the faint of heart. I mean, there's so much truth in that. And for me, it's like, how do we work within the constraints of what FedRAMP or the agencies or the 3PO can allow us to do? One of the questions that like we were talking yesterday, and we was like, what are our challenges? What do we see in the marketplace? One of the biggest things, probably the biggest thing that I see as a challenge, is there just aren't enough people to play at this level, who can really play at this level in a way that actually is enabling. Brian, we were talking about the fact that, okay, we got the people when you first hired the consultants. Yeah, the first people that they put on your project were good, but then they progressively went to newer and newer people. And so they weren't really getting you up to speed the way you needed to be able to actually step into your assessment. And, the question that I would love to hear from Pete at some point is, you said we're bringing on a whole bunch of people, and Tom, you talked about it as well. You're bringing a whole bunch of people on to the FedRAMP team. How are you going to get them up to speed? What programs are you putting in place to grow those people so that they can really participate at a common level? Because I really want to know what that looks like, because I want to do the same thing. I want to be able to find ways to grow people. And to be fair, a lot of people think they can play at the level. And Tom, as you said, this is the show. There's a lot of people who think they can play at that level, and that doesn't mean they necessarily can. But that's one of the biggest issues I have. But one of the pain points that a couple of pain points that I wanted to talk on. The number one thing for me was the consistency of guidance. So between my 3 SAW review meetings, I had one person give me guidance in, let's say this specific one, this is the second meeting. I did that work. When it came time to the third meeting, they're like, what is this? And I said, well, I did exactly what you asked me to do. And they're like, well, why'd you do that? like, because you told me to do it. And that is concerning. And like, and yes, at some point we need to get to the knowledge base where all that information can be out. But in terms of suggestion of what I think might be helpful for communications is if there was a forum where 3PAOs and CSPs could openly communicate about some of these issues and either come to resolution to where it could be handed to the PMO, where the PMO can then actually weigh in, speaking as the federal government, and put that guidance out, that might be a way to move it faster. And I will say all the things that I'm looking at and thinking of improvements are very small, because I think you guys, FSCAC, you guys got the big issues, that's fine. Where I can help, and where I think we can be of use, is how in some of these smaller areas to streamline it. And I guess one other area that came up mostly on the March 28 meeting with the 3PAOs is there was a conversation about moving towards centralizing continuous monitoring, which, hey, I think is great. But it is definitely incongruous with what my experience with both the 3PAOs and the PMO were, which was we accept no risk, or we accept no responsibility for any risk. That's up to the agency. Well, if you're going to do centralized CONMON, that means by definition, you're accepting the risk for that agency for that continuous monitoring and the actions of it. And I would suggest that the unwillingness to even be perceived as dealing with or identifying or dealing with risks made the process harder. For example, we have a couple external services that were absolutely reviewed as not having any sensitive data. It's completely sanitized. And I now have them on my POAM because even though I'm under agency ATO, not the JAB, and I'm allowed to use these non-authorized services, I have to have it on my POAM for now, for forever, because that's the standard of JAB. So there's a disconnect that I would love to see somebody take a look at and how to address.
Great.
But the other somebody comment at the beginning also talking about the number of people, also goes back to the number of people, getting into the 3PAO. It's my understanding that increasingly CMMC is going to be using 3PAOs. Well, that's a problem. If there aren't enough 3PAOs, there aren't enough people to do it. I mean, I'm scheduling a year out already for mine, but again, I'm already now in the program. And the last thing I'll talk about is I think the PMO doesn't always do well distinguishing between somebody's first time through and a repeat, and might be easier. And it just having some consideration of somebody going through the first time might be helpful to have that conversation look a little different. Brian, I'm sorry, I've talked a lot.
Yeah, Brian's got plenty to say, trust me.
No, I think you hit a lot of the same points that I would bring up in terms of the number of people, the expertise, the consistency of the messaging. We went through our first meeting with the PMO. They found dozens of issues, dozens of findings, which was concerning, like I said before, just kind of more of a shock to me. And then the second review we had, which I will say, one of the things that we haven't talked about really is the things that worked well. I will say the overall organization and structure of the PMO's ability to, when they start the review process and the time it takes them to review and schedule the meetings and have these discussions, I will say that worked really well. We knew when we were going to meet, we knew how often, they were very upfront about, hey, your next meeting is in this time. So I will say it was nice to get that kind of right off the bat in terms of just knowing, hey, while I think, 3 weeks is too long to go over these issues, it was still nice to know that, hey, we're definitely going to meet in 3 weeks about our next meeting. But when we went through the first one, we had issues. Great. We went to the next one. We talked about those issues that James, mentioned. But then it was, hey, we also found these things now. And so it was, well, why didn't you find them in the first review? Because now we just lost kind of one meeting to go through these net new findings initially. And so now, we have one more meeting to kind of get through everything. But in essence, we really only have one meeting to get through those identified in the second review, if that makes sense. So it really limited our ability to make sure that now we're trying to fix the things that were found in the first review by the second one. Then the second one, we only have really one more meeting to capture things that were found in the first and now in the second. So we just didn't have a lot of time to address those issues. And it was really the inconsistency of the review from the first. It just seems like it's really unfair to I know you guys have to find the issues and we want to fix them, but it's either more time needs to be spent on the initial review so that when we go into the second one, there isn't additional net new findings that we now are being told from discovery, because that kind of changes our resources, it changes our timing, it changes our impact of what we're trying to prioritize in terms of which ones we need to fix first, second, and third. So I'd say that was one of the pain points that we found.
It's the Lucy with the football. You keep going back and they keep pulling the football away from you.
A little bit.
I mean, we can keep talking, but does anybody have any questions for us to start?
Hey, hey, Carlton Harris here. I have a quick question for you. In the recent release of tongue-tied. In the recent memorandum that was released, is there anything in there that you thought that would have helped you in your process with some of the troubles that you were seeing going through it?
I mean, I haven't read through the whole thing. I haven't really read through it yet. I've been focused on a couple of things like getting our significant change approved. But I did not struggle with what the requirements were or how to do it. It was just, frankly, a lot of it was growing our team to be able to play at that level. And then, frankly, a lot of it's just documentation and making sure that it's appropriate, making sure that we're answering the questions to the depth and breadth that we needed to. And then again, a lot of it was time, really was the time to getting through, getting the assessment, it just took a lot of time.
We got a few hands. I think we're getting to.
I mean, do you guys want me to call on people or just?
I think she's a little disconnected there. Sorry.
If you're comfortable, please go ahead.
Michelle, you're a little bubbly in your audio there, so I'm not sure who you're.
I think Matthew.
I'm trying to call on you, Matt. Please go ahead.
Okay, thank you. I have so many questions. Most of them are really around my ignorance, so please be patient with me. I'm having some problems tracking on a lot of the pronouns being used because there's a lot of theys, thems, and those.
I apologize.
No. Again, I think a lot of it is you all are very experienced in going through the meat grinder, whereas I'm kind of looking at it from the outside. So you have your 3 PAO assessment, and then there's every now and then there's talk about then either second assessment, second review, or another review. And I'm trying to understand if and how much potential rework is being done after a 3 PAO assessment is then delivered to an authorizing official or a PMO, which ideally is just is it complete and to the level of risk, or is there a reassessment and a return and then a cycle that occurs there? And my intent of asking this question is I'm trying to understand how much trust extension is being given to the 3 PAOs to do their job and do it adequately versus really a double check on and a need for having stronger trust in what the 3 PAOs do, if any of that question made sense.
Sure, it absolutely makes sense. And
okay.
So I can speak to it from a bunch of levels. So one, by the time we got our first SAR review, it had been 1.5 years since it had been accomplished. So they said, well, it's been too long. You need to go through another full initial assessment.
And they did that just by time and not necessarily by technology change. Is that?
No, we hadn't changed the technology at all. They said it's been too long, go through it again.
Okay.
And
by they, you mean the
FedRAMP PMO, excuse me. The FedRAMP PMO said,
okay.
no, we're not accepting this because it's been too long.
Okay.
even though that was nothing on us, no part of it was our fault. We didn't do any of that.
Got it.
But we said, okay, because again, I don't control the ball. I have got to play the game.
Understand. Yeah, yeah.
So we made the change. What changes we needed to do, we went through another assessment with a different 3PAO, and that's a whole other conversation. Submitted it, and we were told we were towards the top of the list, but it still took from November until February before we even had one, and then it was May and it was July before it was even later than that, before we had our assessment. And we actually had 3 different meetings with the PMO to go over aspects of it. Now, to your point, is what was the PMO looking and judging and assessing whether the 3PO did a good job? Absolutely. But they were also looking at things they didn't understand about our platform and they needed clarification on. So part of it was their education, but do I think they do a lot of rework? Yes, but I also think they are not necessarily, the PMO is not necessarily as consistent with their guidance as they could be. And they oftentimes in the SAR review will be holding us to standards or guidance that wasn't the case when we actually did the assessment.
Okay.
So, you know, and
yeah,
and to a certain extent, I don't mind that, right? As long as they're not going to stop me because they're looking at it from where I need to be going in the future. Because any of the things that they're hitting me on, I look at as things I need to do to have my system be better. Like I don't have a problem with lots of findings as long as I'm given the time to fix them.
And I think, you know, one of the things you all were talking about was a common open sharing platform to have these types of discussions, set precedent, understand implementation guidance for both 3PAOs and for CSPs, so that you can establish repeatability, understandability, and know, you know, where those bars are to some extent. That's in, okay.
And I do think it would be better if the PMO they could look in, but the PMO, unless they felt necessary, wasn't weighing in, because as Pete talked about, when someone from the PMO puts something out, that is now official government guidance. And there's all sorts of constraints on that I not only understand, I appreciate. But if we can take what happened in our assessment and bring it to other CSPs or 3PAOs, we can get some sort of consolidation around it, and bring it back to the PMO and say, hey, here's kind of what our thoughts were. And then that can be more of a conversation rather than official guidance.
All right, I have one more question that I want to jump on before Bo and Bill jump in. You know, there's a reciprocity discussion in the memo. Do others outside of the federal government look at the FedRAMP authorization as a market differentiator for you, and are you able to use it with folks outside of the feds? And are there other frameworks that you implement that may or may not be put into that reciprocity bucket for the future, like Cloud Security Alliance or ISO or GDPR or whatever else you might be tortured against?
Sure. So we have not bothered to do SOC, any of the others. Frankly, as far as I'm concerned, FedRAMP is the gold standard. It's a 10 out of 10, and everything else is something less. The one thing that I would say that's different is GDPR, and that's because that's a privacy regime, not a security regime. And so those are fundamentally different.
Okay.
But I don't look at those, and this goes to something that was talked about in a previous meeting, was looking at reciprocity between FedRAMP and, let's say, SOC. Well, the depth and breadth of the answers that have to be there for FedRAMP blow away anything you're ever going to see in any kind of SOC documentation.
Yeah, the abstractions are different. Yeah, totally. Okay.
Does that answer your question, Matt?
It does, very much. Thank you, James.
Sure.
Great. Bo, you're next.
Hey, thank you. James, Brian, Tom, I really appreciate your feedback here. It's incredibly rich, and sometimes, you know, some of these hard truths are things that folks actively have to hear openly and publicly in a way to be able to go through and readily acknowledge. I will tell you that having effectively sponsored roughly 30 different cloud service providers, including bigs and smalls, including Colin from Kahua that spoke earlier during the actual public session. This is not easy. It is hard. There are multiple stakeholders, there are multiple work streams, and you know, I think there is some eventual sunlight at the end of this, I think. And all that is to say is that there is some broad commitment to effectively acknowledge that there are some challenge gaps, there are work stream gaps, and you know, between OMB, the PMO, as well as this forum, as well as the FedRAMP board, I think all of this is essentially coming to a head in terms of being able to put some real actionable recommendations that are can be implemented to help to go through, perhaps not directly ameliorate the set challenges that you guys went through, but hopefully make this a little bit more streamlined relative to your active management maintenance of your packages through SCRs, as well as then every other provider that has yet to really experience the opportunity and the challenges that come along with FedRAMP. But I think the feedback here is absolutely welcome. But there is, I think, this broad acknowledgement, and there is like ideation on how to effectively look at the broad set of work streams across 3 POWs, agencies, sponsors, PMO, as well as leveraging organizations that all effectively have, in some cases, different understandings, different expectations on what adequacy typically looks like. So I think there is an answer that we're effectively coalescing around. And I'm really hopeful that, you know, a year from now, we're certainly going to be better than where we are today.
Yep. Thanks, Bo. I'm hoping that some of what you were saying and thanking for us saying these things is because you know you can't. But one of the things that towards the end of what you're talking about, it's something that goes back to what Laura said at the beginning of the meeting, which is doing roadshows. One of my greatest challenges working within the agency that we work with is a lack of understanding of what it means to the differentiation between having an ATO or being FedRAMP authorized, and what that means or doesn't mean. And I think there's not necessarily from the people within OIT, with the technology side, but from the business side. And if that conversation with the agencies can go beyond just the technology teams, the CIO shop, but out to the people who are actually looking for these services to use them, that would be a significant benefit, I think, to the CSPs, because it alleviates a conversation. It makes so I don't have to have it and try and educate the agency personnel on it.
I was just at the Mark Center, you know, basically part of the Pentagon extension in Alexandria, and I was talking to a general about this. And remember, they're rotating around in the DoD. They're rotating from like artillery to over doing IT, and really a limited understanding of FedRAMP. How does it fit into the ATO process? So there's continuous education, I think there should be a lot of not for attribution sessions, and just be constantly on the road talking to folks to try to educate them and help them like adopt FedRAMP. And yeah, I think foot stomp on what James said.
Bill?
Bill Hunt, SEC. First off, thanks everybody for the great presentation, the great talk on this. Tom, long time. Great to see you, my friend. Nice to have you here.
Your hair is longer.
Getting there. So I have a couple of questions that I want to ask you all. I've got 3 areas I'd like to focus. I filibustered so much of today's session already, and I want to go relatively quick through these and make sure we can cover it. You know, the purpose of today's session is really to try and drill down on the recommendations that, you know, this panel is going to have. And so there are a couple of areas that I was noting down as you all were talking that I'd like to hear just a little bit more about. First off, I will admit my ignorance here. We've heard twice today that there's significant gaps in the resources available from the 3PAO side to do these evaluations. That was relative news to me. Again, apparently I haven't been paying close enough attention that people are going to wait that long to even get started in the process. So I was hoping that you all might give us a few recommendations on what's needed there. Do we need more 3PAOs? Do we need the ones that exist, to do more hiring? Do we need more incentives that the government can provide there? Are the assessments that they're doing too thorough and the pipeline isn't moving fast enough? Just around the velocity of the 3PAOs, what would you all suggest?
Brian, do you want to start that one?
Yeah, I was gonna say, it's just, it's kind of train the trainers, right? You're coming up with guidance, and you're pushing that guidance down, and then you're just hoping that some 3PAO, are looking, taking that information able to undergo and understand and apply it to, whatever the CSP is doing. So I think they need more, because we've had conversations with our consulting group, who is a 3PAO, as well as the 3PAO with our actual 3PAO, about, red teaming or, something that's coming out. And both of these quote unquote 3PAOs didn't have guidance on what the GSA, what the PMO is going to expect. And so it's like, really, like, these are two of the top, 3PAOs that were in the industry, and they don't even understand what is coming out in terms of guidance. So we actually had to go kind of and say, listen, until we can't do something until we have more guidance, because it takes us time, it takes money, it takes resources, so when do you want us to do this? And then we're up against the deadline of getting some assessment done. And so we kind of have to say, listen, we have to put this on pause, or we have to take the risk that we're going to get dinged. We know we're going to get dinged on this because there isn't enough guidance. And frankly, it's ridiculous that I can't rely on two of the top 3PAOs to know what the what the PMO is expecting.
I think for me, the answer would come back down to the number of people who can play at this level. And the same problem that Pete's having is, how is he growing his team to play? From my perspective, the only way to understand what it means to go through a FedRAMP assessment is to go through a FedRAMP assessment. I teach, we provide, we recorded all of our sessions, and to new people, we have them watch the sessions to get a sense of what it is, but they still are never going to get it until they're actually under the gun and actually having to answer the questions from an assessor. So it's hard to, this is, as people said, this is hard. This is really hard. So what a 3PAO does to grow their team, maybe something similar to what the PMO does to try and grow their team, the knowledge of their team. And if there's some kind of formula that works, please share it, because I think everybody could use that to how to successfully grow teams of people to play at this level. And maybe Tom at ATAR, some of the academics might have ideas on what a structure might look like to help grow the expertise of the people to be able to do that. Bill, you had a great question about, can we offer other incentives? I don't know what other incentives you could offer the 3PAO within the structure of FedRAMP, other than, hey, you go through this, you're now on the list and you can be used. If you got other ideas on incentives, I'd love to hear it, because I don't know.
I didn't even know if the government needs to start giving out grants for people to start new 3PAOs or something like that. I was just trying to figure out how can we address the velocity that we're seeing in those bottlenecks. That's kind of
so. I think one of the bottlenecks, probably the biggest bottleneck that I saw working with a 3PAO or different 3PAOs, is the biggest hurdle that they have to go through, or the PMO has to go through, is actually learning and understanding the system that they're assessing. Yeah. That's really, really hard. And although our system is small, what it does and how it does it is very complex. And to understand the nuances of it is critical to understand how we address the controls. So if you have to, I spent the vast majority, the heaviest lift I did with both our 3PAOs was educating them on our system. And, I don't know any way around that, because for the 3PO to be able to successfully assess it, they have to understand how it all works and how all it fits together. I don't think you can turn that over to AI, because that's the understanding that you get to. I don't see a way around that.
I was just one thing to point out. I think the issue also is the fact of the number of CSPs that have gone through each level of impact. You have so many at the low, and you have a lot of 3PAOs who are able to assess a low CSP because of the number of controls is so much less, and they're so I'm just going to say easy to employ. And then you get a little tougher, you get a little bit more with the moderate, and that okay, you get a little bit more But the number of high CSPs is, we were like, what number? I think where I was 26, and that was in May. And so the other ones are Google, who has two, Microsoft, right? So you're in Oracle, besides those, there's only a handful, a dozen more actual CSPs at the high level. And so there's just not enough 3PALs who have gone through that experience with those CSPs. So they might have gone through it, 50 times with lows. They might have gone through it 20 times, 10 times with moderates. But frankly, the numbers don't lie. They've only gone through it once or twice, if at all, with a high. And so I think that draws part of the problem is when we went through the high, we just didn't have the expertise because they just haven't gone through it. And so I don't know what kind of incentive you have of like teaching a 3PAL how to go through a high when there isn't any, you could go months without anybody going through the high impact level. You know what I mean? If that makes sense.
Yeah, that's extremely helpful. I have other questions, but I don't want to, again, take up everybody's time. I'm going to lower my hand and raise it back and let my colleagues here jump in as well.
Great. Thanks, Bill. Go ahead, Kayla.
Thanks. So I've heard this a few times from your guys' conversation here. And when we talk about the ecosystem in general not having enough hands-on keyboard or even just maybe availability to communicate processes and next steps and stuff, the ecosystem doesn't have enough talent to play at the level. Do we mean by play at the level, do we mean just understanding the FedRAMP process? Or are you guys referencing more the security skill set? We don't have enough people who have the technical security know-how to handle these FedRAMP conversations. I'd like to understand which perspective, which audience we think really the lack is here.
Partially the FedRAMP process, but not really. I'm not even looking specifically at security. I think if you pigeonhole FedRAMP as a security issue, it's missing the point. This is a business process. Yes, there's technical aspects to it, but this is the reason you're playing the show is I have to know my system so much better than people who don't play at this level. I have to know every last detail for the services that I'm leveraging from Microsoft. I have to know everything about how they do it. And I have to be able to document that effectively and at a 6th grade level so that our 3PO can understand it easily. And so the PMO, when they look at it, can understand it that easily. That is really hard. And that's not about fingers on keyboards. And that's the kind of that's what I'm talking about. This is about, the whole point of FedRAMP from my perspective is to get a good operational product that is secure, resilient, and scalable. And yes, there's a security aspect to it, but to me, FedRAMP is less about security than it is much more of an operational and how do you manage your organization. And to be able to do it at the depth and breadth that we do is not easy. And most people just aren't willing to put in the work to do that. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, it does. I think it's very interesting because I feel like a lot of what we've heard so far and what we like to profess about FedRAMP is that it is the gold standard for security posture.
Security is there. I'm not suggesting that it isn't security, but that's a lot of the stuff I have to do isn't related to security. It's compliance, it's business processes, and how mature are my processes for how I deal with it.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, I mean, the security is actually the easy part from my perspective.
Yeah. I sit on the CSP side. I hear you on that for sure. So I appreciate the conversation for that.
Sure. Happy to.
Great. Thanks, Marcy. Go ahead.
Awesome, thank you. This is Marcy Womack with Shaman. So I am the only 3PO representative on this call. So this has been a really interesting conversation because, we often spend a lot of time, I like to say, like in the trenches with our clients and with cloud service providers, kind of going through this entire process. One question I have for y'all, as you've had varying experiences getting your initial authorization and you're looking for moving through and toward annual authorization and through that process, or annual assessment, excuse me. When you kind of had those hurdles. So James specifically, I know that y'all had to undergo that full like initial again, basically. And if I understand kind of the timeline on that, was a lot of that due to the length of time it took to get the initial agency ATO to get you into the official FedRAMP queue for the FedRAMP auth?
That was definitely a part of it.
Okay.
But again, I mean, yes, absolutely, that took forever, and I won't even deny that. But the fact that we couldn't even submit the SAR to the PMO when it was done, but it had to wait till the ATO had been granted, to me was an issue. It's done, it's there. Why can't it be put in there to note that that was done and have it go the same time it's going in? And again, we did not go through the normal process because we did the RAR and the SAR at the same time because we were trying to address a pandemic need. So we did not go through the normal process. I totally get it. But there was very little flexibility on working through that and recognition of how to do that differently. Does that answer your question, Marcy?
Yeah, it does. Absolutely. I was trying because we've encountered like a variety of scenarios and there are many pain points, like depending, like no matter what. And so I was trying just to make sure that I was understanding kind of one of the primary struggles and hurdles that y'all encountered. So I appreciate that.
Sure.
I think one thing that I've suggested to PMO is how can I have a BPM, just a simple BPM on where things are in the process, so I can have security people doing security things. You know, like how can I manage this process better so I can focus my security people on security things, and you know the management is kind of automated. I don't have to go all these cycles going back and forth. There's lots of things you should do to maximize your talent, if that makes sense. I think Bill's got his hand up still.
Yeah, sorry, back for another round if y'all have me. So one thing that a couple of y'all have touched on, Tom, you brought this up earlier too, you know, about particularly small businesses showing up and just not being ready, like just being able to just trying to stop them in their tracks and just say, you don't know enough to even proceed with this. And this is something that I'm extremely sensitive to. Obviously, you know, having been a small business owner in the past myself, having been on all sides of this like issue, working for SBA, the small business I'm extremely sensitive to, but I've got two minds of it now that I work for the federal government. It's like, I don't want a free pass for anybody, right? I have to know that the tools that you're using are safe and secure and that we should feel safe putting our data in it. But at the same time, that barrier to entry is so high. You know, I was ranting about this in my preamble earlier. So what can we all be doing as the government? And again, like Tom, organizations like ATARC, like how can everybody be working together to start closing some of these gaps so people aren't showing up, particularly the small businesses, on day one and just being like, I have no idea what I'm supposed to be doing. I'm spending a lot of money on this assessment. I haven't even done the basic homework. How can we start to close those gaps more aggressively? Does the government need to be providing, like, again, small business incentive grants for security? Do we need to be doing more training and research? Like, how can we start closing these gaps? What are some outside the box ideas that y'all might have?
Do you want to go, Tom, or do you want me to
go? You go first. I'll go after you.
So to a certain extent, one thing goes back to what Laura said in her conversation earlier, which is the government is not used to having to market its rules and its organizations and how it does business. The government's the government. And I saw this years ago working with the FTC. It's like, it's not your job. It's what I would say is it's organizations like ATARC to be able to bring it to the front, to then bring that out and say, guys, this is what it is. This is how it is to do this. Maybe there are other avenues, but maybe it's other associations that can kind of do that, and having people from PMO or 3POs or CSPs come and talk about it would be helpful. Again, unfortunately, the word can't always come from the government to try and do it. Now, do I think grants are a great idea? Absolutely. How to make that happen, especially for agency your size. Having, you know, if you can help somebody find a grant to be able to help them go through the process, maybe that's an answer, an outside of the box way to use existing structures to get what you want for your agency. I don't know. But I thought that was a really good thought.
Yeah, I think we can provide some guidance for them as they're starting out with some solution is, hey, here's what you should be doing right now, rather than develop a whole solution as, oh, shoot, I need FedRAMP. Also, are you using some modern architectures like containers. That should probably help you. I'm not into it. I heard it hurts you sometimes, but how can you have do that? And also like phase 3s, a lot of the times they will like help you get ATO'd, SIBRs and OTAs and things like that, which, sometimes an OTA and a DoD side is to help you get your ATO, and get the solution so you can use it. It's not easy. It's the advice from the beginning. There's organizations like DECA that do a wonderful job, like kind of really helping you at the beginning stages, prepare for this ATO. Hey, you're just trying to develop a product in the beginning, but not so worried about it getting a customer, but you're just trying to develop a product. You're not worried about the DoD, but you should keep that in mind, because if you're going to do something like FedRAMP, that'll help you in the financial sector. I see it more and more. It's going to help you in other markets you want to get into anyway. So if you're thinking security, building that in from the beginning, you're going to be that much further ahead.
Great. One last question for you all, and then I will end my tirade here. And it's in the very same vein of what you were already starting to talk about there. I'm also concerned about the process after the FedRAMP authorization for folks getting in the door. This is still a barrier. I really wanted to applaud again NIST and OMB for their stance on the presumption of adequacy of the FedRAMP assessment. But again, the FedRAMP assessment is only 60% of the controls. That other 40% above the waterline, the agency is still responsible for, the vendor is still responsible for. Do you all have any suggestions on how the government can help accelerate that? So instead of just waiting a year for FedRAMP and waiting another year to get through the ATO process, that we could get these tools into the hands of the government faster?
It's a great question. In some measure, part of the problem is those particularly the small businesses, they have to grow their level of expertise to be able to do more than just build a product that's nice. It's all the rest of it's around it. At some measure, yes, Bill, you might want a nice small, something that does a neat couple little things for you and your agency, but the process you have to go through, I was in the military for a while, the same process you go through to buy a hammer is what you do for buying a aircraft carrier. The acquisition process is still the acquisition process. What you want to go through for a nifty piece of software that does something nice in there is the same one it goes through for Azure, right? So I don't know how to do that. I don't even know how to suggest for you to do that. And that is part of the challenge. But again, that product has to work no matter what, because actually one thing that might be interesting to look at, is there a way to differentiate between those products that are being used within an agency versus those that are being offered to citizens? Sure. So for example, we're being offered by VA to veterans. That is a very different type of service than one that you're going to use in your back office to do different things. Maybe there's a way to differentiate that and therefore put a different level of expectation on some of the different pieces. I don't know, but it's a thought.
I'm also thinking about tools that might be reused here, not to belabor this much more, but again, I'd recently had to take a product through the ATO process myself with my small scrappy team that, I think Bo actually FedRAMPed originally, and they've been using for almost a decade now. Just figuring out how we can accelerate that other piece of the reuse part of it.
Well, is that more of an acquisition issue, or is that more of a process for an ATO? I don't know the answer to that, but I mean, that also comes to mind of the disconnect between the FedRAMP or the ATO process and the business owners and the acquisition. There's not necessarily a lot of communication, but I would chalk that more up to government bureaucracy and not necessarily being able to update the structures to be able to address some of those issues. And I don't even know how you get through those. We've kind of, wherever we could, we've kind of shifted or tried to give somebody the answer to go take the next step for us. We do the work to hand them the answer so that they can go do it for us. And we took the steering wheel of the car to say what needs to be done next. And so can I go do the work for you, give it to you, and now you can take it on. It's how motivated is the CSP to get it through the process, and what can they do to take the next steps? Some agencies, it's going to be different from agency to agency, but I think at some point that's part of it. But actually, I had a last thought on that, Bill, and that is it comes back to the assumption of risk. And like if you're going to say, hey, FedRAMP is going to absorb taking on some of the risk and assuming some of this risk, that process should become easier because the agency says, oh, that's good enough. But that's a difference in mentality from FedRAMP right now, which is we assume no risk. We assume no liability. That's entirely up to the agency. That's what I think that's a big disconnect that you're trying to deal with for how to get those agency ATOs to go faster.
Yeah, that's a good one, and that's a constant pain point for me. I'm actually wearing my FSMA shirt today. I don't know if you can see here, but FSMA does still assign that risk back to the CIO or the head of the agency, depending on if you're under the CFO Act or not. So yeah, FedRAMP can't legally absorb any of that risk for us, even if they're doing a lot of the work. So it's a good point.
There's also some companies out there like the Stack Armors of the world, where they kind of build out a framework for you. So you inherit a lot of controls right off the bat. I've had some, I haven't used them, but I've used other companies where they're already ATO'd or whatever, and you just kind of you're an add to there's different approaches. I think I don't know enough about it, how it's really worked for companies, but it seems like inheriting a lot of controls, paying decent amount, but not as much as going through it from the beginning. I actually want to learn more about that, see how effective that's been for companies.
Unfortunately, we are out of time today for this panel and questions, but thank you so very much, Jim, Brian, and Tom, for sharing your experiences with the committee today. We will go ahead and move on to our final panel discussion. Ralph Jones from the Department of Treasury, David Mayer from the Department of Education, and Susan Schultz-Zertsy from the Pension Benefit Guarantee Corporation are all here to talk to us about the experiences and challenges of agencies during the FedRAMP authorization process. As before, we have asked our speakers today to respond to several guiding questions about their experience working with FedRAMP. Committee members are asked to ask additional questions they may have for the agency liaisons during the conversation by raising your hand, and I will call on everyone in the order in which your hand is raised. With that, David, Ralph, and Susan, thank you for joining us today. Feel free to turn your video on if you'd like, and unmute yourselves whenever needed to respond to the committee. Would one of you like to kick us off, sharing your...
Sure. So this is Ralph Jones from Department of Treasury. I'd be happy to start.
Sure, go ahead, Ralph.
So first of all, thank you for your invitation to today's meeting. Just for some background, Treasury has been working with the FedRAMP program since its inception with the original OMB memorandum in 2011. And in general, we have very positive things to say about the state of the program. In terms of our experience in working with FedRAMP, the PMO has been very responsive through the authorization process. We have sponsored several CSPs via agency ATOs, and we have also leveraged JAB ATOs as well. We also appreciate that FedRAMP has fostered a common baseline of security expectations around the cloud. As with a lot of agencies, we initially struggled getting confidence around whether these CSPs were going to be able to meet the same NIST controls that we would be expected to meet as a federal agency hosting a system on premises. But the FedRAMP process has enabled us to gain that assurance and gain confidence in the level of rigor behind the controls that are in place. We also think that the 3PAO process has worked well, even though it has taken a lot longer to go through assessments than I think a lot of us would have envisioned. I certainly can share some of the pain going through some of the initial authorization process that others have mentioned today. One area where we have had definitely some struggles is in figuring out the customer responsibilities when dealing with multiple cloud providers hosting information for the same system, for the same authorization boundary. So we think the customer responsibility matrix is definitely a good start, but as the FedRAMP program looks to modernize and go with digital authorization packages, anything that can be done to streamline the customer responsibility process so that agencies know what they're responsible for at the end of the day, I think will dramatically accelerate the overall ATO process. Another pain point for us is in continuous monitoring. We found that there isn't as much consistency in the level of reporting between different CSPs as we would like. And when there are deficiencies in the continuous monitoring process, we've struggled to figure out how to escalate that appropriately so that those deficiencies can get resolved in a timely manner. In terms of hopes and dreams with the FedRAMP modernization process, the big thing is just to make sure that as we look to automate the authorization process and leverage some of the industry frameworks, that we don't forget in that process that at the end of the day, agencies are responsible for ensuring the public trust. So we need to make sure at the end of the day that the security controls we're going to wind up with are going to meet that same high standard that we have today in NIST 853 revision 5 and the associated baselines in 853B, as well as the current FedRAMP Rev 5 baselines. The second thing is just to look at ways that we can reduce risk for new CSPs. I'm not sure how to say it, but just to make sure if we've got somebody that's new to the marketplace, that there's more guidance and more hand-holding available to them so they are willing to take the leap of faith in working with the federal government. Because again, it's very challenging to do the work that the government asks CSPs to do. And we just don't want people to be scared away as we try to expand the marketplace. The only other feedback I would provide is just that I think it will be imperative that all agencies work together with the FedRAMP PMO as some of the elements of Memoranda 2415 get finalized into policy, so that we can iterate and learn as we go along. For example, as we figure out what types of CSPs are actually going to be subject to FedRAMP and which are not, that we collaborate so we strike that right balance between making sure the FedRAMP program has solid footing so that CSPs will have the leverage to follow it, but also making sure that we don't box ourselves into a corner and not be able to utilize a cloud product at all, because there's just no model in which they could go through FedRAMP authorization. And that's pretty much my comments. I'd definitely be willing to answer any questions.
Hey there, this is Sue Schultz-Searcy. I can run through mine next, if David's okay with that.
Sure, go ahead.
We appreciate the opportunity as a small agency to come to the committee and talk through some of the things that we're experiencing. I think it was great for me to hear the CSP perspective. I think sometimes we are in this bubble saying, well, this process works for the other guy, so we just kind of have to deal with it. But it was nice to hear that they're having some issues that they're working through as well. So what works well for us right now, as a small agency, I'm with Pension Benefit Guaranty Corporation. We are both been an agency partner sponsoring, and also we are a consumer. So we do leverage a good deal of cloud services. We actually recently developed our cloud inventory dashboard so that we can see very clearly what we have and where we have it. We've been very supportive and gotten a lot of support from FedRAMP PMO, on-demand support when we are in the midst of something, in the process of something, being able to reach out to somebody at FedRAMP and ask some questions early on so that we don't get stuck in the process later, getting sent back to start. We appreciate everything that we've gotten from them. The guidance, policies, process that is available to us is great. It has helped us build our own cloud security guidance, which encompasses the FedRAMP requirements and our agency requirements for being either an agency partner or a consumer of cloud. Makes it nice and crystal clear for our agency folks on what they need to do and what they can expect. We appreciate the continuous monitoring performance management, making it very clear that continuous monitoring is on the agency and the agency partner is responsible for tracking and managing that CSP. We're in the midst of doing that right now with one CSP. We've been able to pull that document up and say over and over again, we need to have a conversation with the CSP and agree to some of these terms of how we're going to do continuous monitoring now, rather than to come back later when they're already operating and they're going to say, you didn't tell me we were going to need to provide these things to you. So it's helpful to have those conversations early on, and we appreciate FedRAMP has given us those. We also really appreciate the FedRAMP agency liaison group and the collaborations that go on there and conversations. I know Ralph is usually on a lot of these calls. I appreciate all of his questions and some of the ideas that he's put forth. Makes it a lot easier to kind of benchmark against what other people are doing, seeing if other issues are coming up in other agencies as well and how they're addressing it. So we appreciate FedRAMP's push to get our agency liaison group together. Some of the pain points we're experiencing as a consuming agency or an agency partner, we fully understand it's our responsibility as the agency to identify, manage security, privacy risks of the cloud services that we are using. Our current information source for that right now is the FedRAMP portal. And we have found some serious errors and issues with the portal. We use that for our continuous monitoring efforts, for tailoring, for implementation, looking at POEM status, vulnerability management. It's a key tool for our security teams to be using and our compliance teams. Unfortunately, it is often out of date, missing necessary information for our security officers and compliance teams to perform their work. Examples of that, continuous monitoring and POEM reports are missing. One provider had it missing for over 8 months and stated they weren't aware that there was a FedRAMP portal that they needed to post that to. We see out-of-date SSPs and SARs. We've had a very difficult time verifying Rev5 migration efforts from the CSPs so that we could move forward and migrate our controls. We often find that the customer responsibility matrix and the SSP do not align or match. Controls that are often offered in one place are reported as customer responsibility in another place. It makes it tricky for us to tailor controls appropriately and to understand those risks that we are seeing. One of the ways we have tried to address this, if we've stood up our own cloud security review teams, in which a team apart from our security officers go into the portal, review these things, mark down the deficiencies, reach out to the CSPs, and work to get those documents that are needed, work to get answers to some questions that are needed. We also do a supply chain risk management assessment at this point as well, so that if there are other things that we need to know about and risks we need to take on, we can do that. It's been a value to our security officers as they're doing their job so that they can understand what those risks are that they may need to address, mitigate, manage, or even accept. We also are seeing that the access process, the access forms are still very much a manual process for us when we want to get access as a shopper or when we have issued an ATO to go through that process to access a form, to access that documentation. We are on our end trying to automate the form so that we can have a better flow of signatures and approvals so we can get that done a little bit faster to be able to get that to FedRAMP to get that information back. We'd love to be able to see some kind of online requests or an access process that is a little bit easier to manage. Also, we are struggling with the lack of ability to consume the cloud service within our GRC tool. We utilize our tool for FSMA reporting, for compliance and oversight, for various continuous monitoring metrics that we run. We understand that many of the cloud services do have an OSCAL process in place. We look forward to leveraging that and being able to try to get that into our GRC tool. I know FedRAMP is in the midst of acquiring its own GRC tool. We look forward to some of those areas. And I think I covered that as part of the what's the ideal FedRAMP look to you. Another item, integration of other tools for visibility for continuous monitoring. We already have the CDM efforts in place. It would be wonderful if we could allow these agencies and the federal government to see the trends and risks in cloud, utilizing some of these already existing tools, being able to ingest some of that material from there. Lastly, we would love to see FedRAMP continue to act as a collaborative facilitator between CSPs and agencies. We're seeing very few CSPs have collaborative Kanban groups. We find those very helpful, very valuable as a small agency when we are trying to ask questions or just get some information from a CSP. When we have to go to a CSP to ask about an incident or a breach, many times it takes us a few tries to get them to sit down at the table and share that information with us so that we understand how to move forward. I think if there were more agencies pulled together in that conversation, it would be more worth it to a cloud provider to sit down with those conversations. And we believe FedRAMP can really be that connecting thread for that. And also can help with continuous monitoring, corrective actions, and significant changes that might be impacting agencies. We feel that communication can happen a little bit more periodically. I think that's what I have. I'll turn it back over to Data.
Thanks, Susan. Yeah, so I kind of sit in a bit of a interesting spot. I started out at a 3PAO. Then I got transitioned over to a CSP, and now I'm on the federal side. So still waiting for opening on the FedRAMP board for the quadfecta there. But definitely gives me a lot of perspective. I guess in the early days, one of the things I saw was a lot of kind of marketing and push from the FedRAMP, from the FedRAMP team on getting it out there. I would say there was times when I was originally at that 3PAO that they weren't sure it was worth the investment to become a 3PAO. And I think that might tie into similar kind of the discussion from the previous panel, where the 3PAO also has to make significant investments in themselves in order to become a 3PAO and remain a 3PAO and make sure that they get the CSPs. So similar to the CSPs having to make that initial dig their heels in for the long run, those 3PAOs also do. So I don't know if that's a tidbit to think about when thinking about the lack of resources on the 3PAO side of things. But obviously jumping ahead quite a bit, in the FedRAMP land here, especially with all these new transitions, FedRAMP kind of outgrew itself. That's one of the things we feel here, especially with the modernization and kind of shifting the PMO and kind of reallocating the JAB authorized CSPs down to the agencies. It kind of seems that FedRAMP was too successful for itself. And I guess some of the feelings that we got here at the Department of Education is instead of kind of growing itself to be able to handle the volume, which I think a big part of this transition was the backlog of CSPs that were not getting through the PMO reviews in a timely fashion. It used to be 4 to 6 weeks. And then it got to 4 to 6 months. And obviously for a CSP, that's very hard to work with. One thing which I didn't hear in the earlier panel, which I want to mention, the agencies that I've worked on their cloud security team is once the department has granted the ATO, that authorization allows utilization within that agency. Maybe there are some agencies there that maybe aren't as mature in their process, and they still want to wait to get that kind of final approval from the PMO office. And that's kind of, another drag on those CSPs that are chomping at the bit to work with the agency that actually extended that hand, inviting them to the dance, as someone mentioned earlier. So, maybe utilizing that a bit more from the agency side. Once you get through the agency ATO, you still need to go, to get on the marketplace, et cetera. But there is still that agency ATO, and you could carry multiple agency ATOs while you're still waiting for that PMO review. Some of the things that we appreciate and feel that works well with the FedRAMP process, definitely the standardization. I know there was discussion earlier about some nuances and guidance that goes here and there, but I think for the most part, it's a pretty well-oiled machine. Here at the Department of Education, we have about 60 CSPs. I would say about a quarter of them we were the initial sponsor for. We have a couple of them more in the pipeline, and really the process, the in-process, the readiness, everything that goes on, it's pretty well laid out. Obviously, some speed bumps along the way, but that's something that we appreciate, how all the agencies and all the CSPs are kind of, well, the ones that are familiar with it, and that might be, getting the word out. As successful as FedRAMP's been with over 400. I also heard earlier in the call, someone felt the 400 products out on the marketplace are kind of, I don't want to say insignificant, but not as many as it potentially could be. I definitely hear that. Obviously, thousands of products out there that want to get into the FedRAMP pipeline. So working with the agencies, I mean, just one thing that we do here at the department is when any of our stakeholders are looking for a product, we'll meet with them. And if there's already an existing product on the marketplace, we're not going to encourage them to go out and look for another solution. So, that guidance that we kind of give here will obviously limit brand new CSPs on the marketplace if that solution already exists. So at some point, the marketplace is going to be saturated to a degree of CSPs that are offering similar, products and services. I was mentioning, some of the pain points that we've, been seeing over the years here, both again in my roles as 3PAO as well as at the CSPs is, CSPs that have multiple platforms, sometimes it makes it easier. Sometimes it makes it harder. You have the Adobes, you have the Ciscos that have all these different products. Sometimes, again, when they streamline it, it makes it easier when they're completely separate. So, there's just something on the CSP side. They think they could just, piggyback off a different feature set. If it's part of the same product, fine. If it's a completely new offering, they're going to have to go through it again. Another thing I see with the agencies is we don't always need all the features that a product is offering. So we're sitting there going through an assessment or doing our internal assessment for one of those initial CSPs, and they have all these different features that are creating issues, with their assessment, and they're trying to do all this stuff, and we kind of only need the features, and that kind of sometimes the rub there between the agency and the CSPs. Obviously, they don't want to cut back on what they're offering because they have an agency they're working with, but at the same time, do we want to really incur the risk of an entire full suite of products if we're only using 2 or 3 with that? Another thing which I think Susan had mentioned with the liaisons, it is very helpful. Sometimes when we're working on the continuous monitoring with the multiple agencies, it does get a little interesting. One agency is okay with the significant change, other ones want more review, more testing, etc. So even though obviously, there is guidance out there from FedRAMP on how to do multi-agency continuous monitoring, getting all the agencies on board to kind of go the same way, I think would help with some of that rub there. OSCO was mentioned as well. Still waiting for some of our CSPs for those adopters. Obviously, the CSAM and the GRC tools out there that still haven't, been able to even provide, OSCO capability. That's going to be hard for our adoption. Even if you have a CSP out there who's going to be able to provide their documentation and package in OSCO, if we don't have the tools on the other side of the house to be able to ingest and process them, the OSCO is not going to, work as intended. Another thing, which, want to hear, I guess, from the other agencies or whoever's on the OMB mandates and the CISA BODs, here at the department, we take those really seriously. All of our FSMA systems obviously need to be compliant with those. But then when we work with the CSPs, they're like, well, we haven't gotten any guidance from the PMO yet. So I would say, the OMB mandates and those, CISA BODs, FedRAMP is a little coy sometimes in our impression of sending out those mandatory guidance to the CSPs. Kind of puts the agencies in a little bit of a tight spot when our FSMA systems have to be, up to par on one of those BODs, whether it be Zero Trust, TIC, whatever else. But then we go to the CSPs and they're not participating at the level we need them to. And that also, introduces a certain amount of risk, which we kind of need the PMO, the FedRAMP board to have our back and kind of reach out to the CSPs on our behalf, kind of as the carrot and the stick that, if you're going to be a part of this FedRAMP process, these CISA BODs, these KEVs, they're serious stuff, and you got to step up. So I guess that's the long and short of it from the Department of Ed. Thanks.
So much. And for any of our committee members, do you have any questions for this panel? Josh, go ahead.
Hi, thanks. This is Josh from the Department of Veterans Affairs. I had a question on something you mentioned around the effect of a certain number of similar products kind of being included within a category in the marketplace and how that might affect the kind of larger marketplace and, whether it's really worth it for a vendor or whether you would even suggest a customer within your agency, like kind of pursue a certain new thing when there's already several things on the marketplace that are already, or one thing at least that is already approved. Two questions on that. One, have you had any pushback from anybody in your legal or kind of acquisition side of the agency on the potential impact on that and things like competition and some of the rules they're usually pretty concerned with? And secondly, do you feel like that happens when there are multiple products available, or is that happening when a product is available? So more along the lines of, instead of there being a several within a category and maybe we don't want a fifth one, do you see where people get to one and then go, all right, there's one, that's the one we use because we don't want to have to do this again? I'm just interested in any of your experiences with either of those.
Yeah, no, appreciate that. I mean, I'll say, just let's see, using a SIM tool, for example, right? And obviously we're not endorsing any products here, but you have, let's say, Splunk and Alien Vault out there. One of them might already be in the department, and a new office is coming and say, hey, we need a SIM tool. We want, a cloud-based SIM tool, right? So definitely if we've issued the ATO already to one of those SIM tools, we're going to say, hey, we already have this. It already has a Department of Ed ATO, look at that. It's obviously going to be their decision if they want to go that route. And then in the event they came to us on a certain products, again, let's say a SIM tool that they need, even if we have not issued an ATO for any SIM tool, it's in our best interest to say, hey, check the FedRAMP marketplace first, because when you think about it from our perspective, from the agency,
engaging with a SIM tool that is not FedRAMP authorized by any agency versus a SIM tool that already has an ATO, the level of knowledge base and everything, we don't need to start from scratch, right? So I haven't thought about the legal ramifications of that, but just from our process of either engaging with the product that we've already given the ATO versus and also kind of through that onboarding process, if one SIM tool has an ATO on the marketplace and the other one doesn't, we're generally going to go with that. So again, just using SIM tool as an example, if you're a new player and you're your own SIM tool and you look at the federal marketplace and you already see 4 SIM tools out there, you're thinking to yourself, okay, even if I found an agency to sponsor me and we'll get with them, just by virtue of being on the federal marketplace versus not, you're miles ahead of the competition when it comes to, federal agencies looking around. So again, I haven't thought about the legal ramifications, but on the practical side, that's kind of how we view things. Yeah, thank you. And I understood the practical side of it, I think, is usually what we're used to dealing with here. It's more along the lines of if you don't have a contract in place already with that company that you utilized, you're now going and asking someone to write a new contract with that vendor and essentially restrict competition just to the vendors that are, or the vendor potentially, which is why I asked about a single one within that marketplace. And personally, we've had some difficulties with some of the law around that on our side. It comes up a lot, and just interested if you guys are seeing the same thing. So thank you. That was insightful.
Hey, this is Sue Schultz, CRC. Our agency, we have a technical review board that looks at anything new and must approve that. As part of that board, we do have our procurement folks and legal sitting on that board. What we ask is when they come in and we already have that offering through another FedRAMP service, the business needs to show how that offering does not meet their requirements, whatever business requirements those are, and that whatever new thing that they would like to use instead does meet those requirements better, or is a better product, or is a different product that they'll be able to utilize elsewhere. Then the TRB to make that decision on, do we need to put another thing into the TRM and approve that, or would it be better to go with what we currently already have that's already initiated, that's already operating, that's already being monitored. And so I know from the TRB, it's a very tough sell for these folks to say, yes, we already have this, but let's add it, let's add another version of it or another flavor of it to this. So the business really has to then do the market research, show they've done that market research, show that they've tested the current tool, and also that they've tested out what they want for the new tool. They've done the demos, they understand their requirements. It just helps our businesses hone their requirements. And then our legal team can say, yep, they've done all this work, they've documented that. So now we can make a decision to either move forward with that newer item or stick with what we have.
So if I can ask one clarifying question to that, thank you. I think my question is around the inverse, not when you want to get a new one approved and compete that. It's when you don't have a contract in place for that legacy thing that you're saying is the preference. Do they support pushing back to that customer and saying, no, you must use, this board has made a decision, you must use that tool, and then limiting competition on that contract, you would then have to go to right to that tool. Is that something you've done in the past? You've seen the lawyers and the contracting folks in that shop support that as a reason to,
We haven't really received any of the pushback that you're talking about.
Okay.
As long as, again, it's very clear and documented, the TRB board decision usually stands.
Got it. We have a tool for that. Restrict your competition to that tool unless we, for some reason, feel like another tool is like that. All right, thank you.
Does any of the committee members have any additional questions for this panel? Great. Well, thank you so much, Ralph, David, and Sue for joining us today. We are going to move to our final topic of our agenda, which, Larry, would you like to kick us off, gathering the key takeaways from this meeting and recapping any closing remarks you may have?
Yes, absolutely, Michelle. Just trying to get my right tabs in line here. First of all, thanks to all of our speakers, our guests, the presenters, Pete, Ashley, Laura, Jim, Brian, and Tom, and also Ralph, Sue, and David, and for the committee members for the questions that you asked. This was really a phenomenal session for us in terms of the information that you shared, the insights that you shared. It was extremely helpful. For me, the biggest takeaways, and I do, want to just prime the pump for the committee members. I hope you've all been taking notes and really getting valuable information from all of our presenters today. From the first agenda item, the FedRAMP memo, takeaways included that OMB really did listen to this committee's feedback in the preparation of the memo. I appreciate the emphasis that OMB put on automating the authorization process with digital packages using OSCAL, which is something this committee should look deeper into in terms of identifying and documenting our ways to expedite the authorization process, which is one of our priorities. Are there process opportunities within this digital authorization process to expedite authorization? From the industry panel, the need for additional FedRAMP staffing impacting the timelines and in turn, bottom line. I'm thrilled that Pete is here listening, talking to us in the beginning and participating in this meeting, because this is a challenge. Bill has identified this in previous meetings, Bill Hunt, in terms of FedRAMP's resourcing and budget, recognizing that it's limited, but how can it be improved? To what end? What would a perfectly staffed and budgeted FedRAMP look like? It's certainly an opportunity for Bill for Pete as the new director, coming in fresh from the outside to bring that fresh perspective. The inconsistency of guidance. So where is it inconsistent, and how can FedRAMP improve and clarify and hopefully simplify its guidance? What are some actionable solutions that we on our committee could propose to reduce that inconsistency? And the lack of 3PAO resources, the lack of 3PAO experience at the moderate and high level, which are causing bottlenecks and delays and increased costs. So how can FedRAMP better support the 3PAOs at the high and moderate level? What actionable solutions, again, can we as a committee propose for FedRAMP? What are some actionable ways FedRAMP can support expediting this process? And from the agency panel, again, inconsistency in reporting in CONMON between CSPs and continuous monitoring. And when there are deficiencies, how agencies struggle with how to escalate and resolve those in a timely manner. What can FedRAMP do to standardize on this? Again, from the committee, I'll continue to ask, what actionable solutions can we as a committee propose? Additionally, support for CSPs that are new to FedRAMP, which again may touch on some of the smaller CSPs that struggle with being able to afford a FedRAMP authorization. What can we do? What can FedRAMP do to support them more? And what actionable solutions can we as a committee propose? The FedRAMP portal issues, out of date, missing CONMON info, with CSPs unaware of the need to use it, or information located in different places and being hard to find. Again, actionable solutions that we as a committee can propose. And also important, the success of collaborative CONMON. And how can FedRAMP incentivize other agencies to do more collaborative CONMON? What actionable solutions can we propose? So with that, that summarizes my immediate takeaways, my initial notes. Let me open it up to the committee members to invite your observations and your notes as well, please.
Hey Larry, this is Mike from Google. I just had a quick question. If we had questions for Pete that we would like him to be able to answer, is there a format or a way for us to submit those to Peter?
Pete's right here. Pete, you about to go off mute?
I am willing to state that the public is free to email info@fedramp.gov with any inquiries, questions, etc., and tag me into those. And I will make sure that someone on my team responds to all of those. I actually don't even need to do that. They're doing it already. And as appropriate, they'll escalate those to me.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you, Pete.
And Mike, if you do have any questions that you would like discussed in future staff meeting, you can,
I'm sorry, Michelle, but you're breaking up really bad. I'm not getting that. Maybe if you could put it in chat.
Yeah, we lost all after. Hey, Mike, if you do have,
okay.
It pretty much went garbled after that.
I'm sorry. Yeah, if you do have any questions that FSCAC to have in an open meeting, just email me.
Okay, thank you.
And Matt, you're next.
All right, I think I've hit all the buttons here. Yeah, thanks, Larry. Good summary. I mean, Josh's question was kind of my question, and maybe this is more of a deeper thing to poke into, but the initiation and sponsorship business processes and the potential unintended consequences to the markets and accessibility to markets by agencies was an interesting thing that kind of popped up there. Josh, maybe you could help me if I've captured that right, but that was my question, but you beat me to it at the end. And then the other thing I have is, and I just kind of touched on this, and this might be a deeper thing as well, is the red teaming inclusion in the OMB memo. Here be dragons. There's a lot of nuance and important nuance in including this in an assessment program around disclosure and data ownership and vulnerability disclosure program adherence and equities for the government, who owns what is discovered. All of these issues that go along with a red team really need to be exercised and kind of contingency planned before something goes into place. Those are my two. That's what I learned today.
Great point about exercising it as well. The importance of exercising it. Thank you.
Kayla, you're next.
So one of the things that I felt I've heard a few times throughout the conversations was the need for real legal clarification on risk acceptance and responsibilities for that for the agencies. So actually making it very clear that the whole principle of presumption of adequacy is going to be feasible for heads of agencies to be able to actually do that legally. So I think that stood out to me as something that was brought up a couple times, something somebody needs to tackle. So maybe we can make recommendations there.
Joshua?
I think Matt did a good job of restating my thought in that one bullet. I was just going to say where it's a sponsorship committee, the word a sponsorship and market research is maybe another way. Like even when they haven't sponsored something, not sponsoring it has an effect on the market, if that makes sense. So, and I would very much, although not necessarily my area of expertise, the red teaming is something I hear a lot around just confusion within the agency, and so just second, getting just some clarification as to exactly what that's supposed to look like, so businesses and agencies have a little more an understanding with it.
All right, Bo?
Yeah, I just want to put stomp one thing here. I thought that was fairly consistent throughout and a contributing factor to some of the delays corresponding to process. One particularly relative to guidance and the inconsistency in that guidance vis-a-vis 3POWs, advisors, agency sponsors, FedRAMP, as well as then leveraging agencies. Clearly, if everyone is effectively going through and hearing something different, you can see that as being a contributing factor, if not a significant contributing factor in delays, rework, costs to vendors, 3POWs. And then the other aspect is rework, understanding what work is being done at the 3POW level, at the advisory level, by assessors, by agency sponsors, by the PMO. To me, this is a classic case of program and project management, and essentially going through and looking at this in a singular work stream with the work effectively broken out as a project across those individual components of that work stream versus looking at this more broadly as separate work stream at different points in time with different stakeholders having individualized responsibilities. So I think there's a clear-eyed opportunity around looking at the entirety of the assembly line operation in a singular work stream that actually has key stage gates, particularly relative to the performance of work and the associated quality checks at that point to ensure that everyone is essentially operating with a common set of expectations, particularly relative to adequacy. And what benefit that provides is then mitigating some of the correspondence around reassessment, rework, re-review of the package in its entirety or parts of the package in its entirety that contributes to some of the things that we've heard around. We achieved a FedRAMP agency authorization, but are now waiting 6 to 12 months to actually get entered into the FedRAMP marketplace. So I think there's a clear opportunity for us to be able to go through and take a look at this as a singular work stream with multiple broken down parts that have to effectively have visibility and transparency through and through, working across a common set expectation. Over.
Okay, thanks, Bo. Kayla, you're next.
So to add, it's a little bit, I think, within guidance. I think it kind of touches on a lot of the different things we've talked about. Engaging in the discussion of how do we bring this forum that is publicly available, maybe FedRAMP ecosystem available, to help with clarifying processes, to help with adding best practices, to help with details on controls where the community can talk about these things. So even if it's separated between the different components of this ecosystem that is FedRAMP, we need a forum, we need a place for that conversation to be able to happen freely. I think that was brought up multiple times.
Joshua and Bo, you both still have your hands up. Do you have anything else to add?
I'm sorry,
Okay.
I do not. My apologies.
Anything else? Any final thoughts on that?
This is Bo. I would just say we need to do more of this, and I think the challenges that we see across the various key stakeholder groups in a way that reflects, assessors, advisors, vendors, agencies, program as well as the agency sponsors. I know we've heard from two key constituency groups, one leveraging organizations, another cloud service providers. It would be very interesting to actually go through and take a look at this from the vantage point of sponsoring organizations. some of the challenges from leveraging organizations, some of the vantage point from 3POW, 3POWs as well as 3POW advisors. I think we need to hear more of this. And today's discussion, in my mind, has been probably one of the most vibrant that we've had in a very long time. And, you know, I think some of these truth, and they are absolutely that. I've been in violent agreement with much of that which has been stated today. I think is super important for us to be able to properly diagnose some of the challenges to be able to properly solution them. Over.
Great, thank you so much. Larry, do you have anything else for the meeting today?
Absolutely. Although honestly, with Bo's remarks there, we both could just drop the mic. Really, thank you all. We had a great turnout today. Excellent presenters, excellent speakers. And as Bo said, lots and lots of truths were spoken here today. We've captured it. A great turnout on the committee too. Really strong attendance on the part of the committee members. So I really appreciate that. I'm glad we all heard it. Pete, thrilled that you were here and stayed through the whole meeting and heard everything that was said today. So for the committee, thank you all for sharing your thoughts, participating today. Also the members of the public, really do appreciate your participation, your giving of your time to participate, to listen, to hear this. We do welcome and invite, understanding that we have to limit the time at the beginning of this meeting. We welcome and invite your comments through the public comment portal. And again, thanks to all the committee members who helped get the word out, because we did see a significant increase in public comments due to people getting the word out, putting it, inviting public comments through social media channels, et cetera. So definitely that it helps. We need, in order for this committee to be effective, we need to hear those perspectives. And today in this meeting, we heard a lot. Now that we have this discovery phase done, in the next meeting, please take a look at your notes from today. Come prepared with these notes from your independent research, as well as from the presentations and discussions today, and be ready to brainstorm actionable recommendations on these two priorities. Please, again, also take notes of the public comments we've received. Our outreach has been successful with a high increase in submissions, and the folks who have submitted them have been thorough and generous with their comments. So please review their comments, as they are incredibly helpful in helping us to better understand these issues. In the meantime, I definitely look forward to our next meeting, where we'll work on developing a structure for our report, and then we'll dive into deliberations to draft our actionable recommendations in our two priority areas. So again, thank you all for your diligent and thoughtful work to help improve the process for the secure adoption of cloud computing products and services in the federal government. Michelle, back to you.
Thank you, Larry. And thank you all again for joining this meeting today. With that, I will now adjourn this meeting at this time. Thank you again.
Thanks, Michelle. Thanks, Larry. See you all next time.
Thank you, Michelle. Bye.
Thank you, everybody. Great seeing you all. Thank you very much.